Okay, Val, you ready to go? We think we're live? Memorex or something? Oh, there we go. So let's call this meeting to order. Let's start with roll call. Mike, you can start on your end.
Mike Danaher.
John Foster.
Steve Aglash. James Cook.
Judith Schwartz.
Okay, Mr. Hoyle, would you like to speak? We're going to do oral communications now. Come on down. And Bruce and Walt, do you guys want to speak as well?
Yeah.
All right, so technically, do we have a comment card from you? Did you do your little comment card thing? Here, do your little comment card thing. Yeah. Let Jeff do his, give him some space, let Jeff do his thing, you fill out your comment card, and then you're up next. Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to point out that in Council's packet for this week, there was a non-agendized item about the two CTC studies, fiber to the premises and wireless, that sort of said they're going to be ready in early July, but they're not going to go to Council until September or October. And it didn't say anything about when, if ever, they were going to UAC. So I was going to comment about that. And then I found in the rolling calendar, I just picked up a couple minutes ago, that it's going to UAC in September, and the rolling calendar doesn't say when, if ever, it's going to council. So there's a little discrepancy between those two items, but I'm pleased that at least somebody thinks it's coming to UAC. And September is okay. August might be better. If the reports were to become available to the public earlier than September, I would certainly read them very carefully. So if anyone wants to ask for that, please do. Thanks.
Sounds good. Director Fang, I think we'll take that as a note of a request from the public for the report should it become available earlier. Bruce, good to see you. Thanks kindly. Next up is Bruce Hodge. I assume, well, let's see, actually, Bruce, you've indicated item 1 and 2, which is discussion of results of cost effectiveness evaluation of electrification options. Just I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, and the staff recommendation that the UAC recommend the council review and approve the proposed work plan, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to hold your comments for them? Okay, so we'll hold off until. And you signed up for the same thing? Very good. Mr. Hayes, we'll note that accordingly. Okay, with that, let's go to approval of the minutes. Any comments, objections, concerns, discrepancies, typos?
I move approval.
Very good. Seconded. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. Any agenda review and revisions? Our colleague Commissioner Hall is not here tonight, so we don't have to move any water items about. Anything changing? Okay, next up is report from commissioner meetings or events. Commissioner Schwartz, I'm counting on you to have done something interesting in the last month.
So I just went to something at SRI, that was the ambassador from the Philippines and the secretary of trade. And what was, again, very interesting is that they had about 20 companies from the area, and at least half of them were working in the smart energy, smart cities area. So it was clear, I mean, there was a lot going on with sort of in the Philippines, and what I found really interesting was they have a lot of young people who are very technologically literate, and they are very excited about all of the kinds of energy management and things related to climate control, climate change, that are some of the issues that we're dealing with here in Palo Alto. So I was pleasantly surprised about sort of all these issues in common.
That's great. That's good to know. Thanks. Anyone else? Commissioner Eglash, you're always off at interesting meetings in faraway places. Anything to report?
No.
All right. Well, we'll let you off the hook this time. And Commissioner Cook, we know you're always in far-flung places, but but places that some of us haven't been to, but that's okay. All right, let's move on to Director of Utilities report. Val?
Thank you very much, Chair Foster. I'm going to give you a quick readout of a few of the community outreach events, workshops, and staff speaking engagements in June. We have the Bosca Design It Yourself Native Garden on June 3rd. At that workshop, we had 130 folks in attendance. Communications Manager Catherine Elbert did a presentation to the Department of Water Resources covering Palo Alto's adoption of the State Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. That was on June 8th with about 20 people in attendance. Bosca's Install It Yourself Native Garden held on June 13th had 100 attendees. Peninsula Sunshare's Solar Workshop held on June 14th had 15 participants. And mind you, this was during Game 5 of the NBA Championship Series. Palo Alto Family YMCA, we had a table there on water conservation. There were 50 attendees on June 20th. And then we had a Net Zero Home Energy Efficiency Workshop on June 27th with 40 attendees. Quick update on the drought, and you will hear a bit more from Assistant Director Jane Ratchey later. I think you're giving it, not Carla. Okay. Staff is closely tracking citywide water use to monitor progress toward meeting Palo Alto's 24% water use reduction goal and posting updates. You can find them on our website at cityofpaloalto.org/water. Since the beginning of 2015, citywide water consumption is reduced by more than 22%. Staff is focusing educational efforts around the drought, offering free community workshops, attending neighborhood, school, and business group meetings, advertising in utility bill inserts, local papers, and on television, and encouraging community members to report incidents of water waste through the Palo Alto 311 mobile app. The city has also set up a new email address, drought@cityofpaloalto.org, to enhance communications from our community. We also added to our website a place where we're posting tips that we get from community members so that there's sort of a sharing of ideas on how to reduce water use. Marketing services update, Peninsula Sunshares enrollment, and that's our group buy program for solar panels, if you'll recall. As of June 10th, we've had 526 total, that's not just the city of Palo Alto, Peninsula Sunshares program registrants. Palo Alto had 225 of those, or 43% of the participants. Palo Alto Sunrun has already gotten 10 contracts for 37.35 kilowatts, and Palo Alto SkyTech, the other contractor we're working with, has 9 contracts for 50.48 kilowatts, and they help with the installation, the panel purchasing and the installation. Palo Alto Green Gas, we have 888 customers signed up as of June 26th. Remember, we only went live with this at the beginning of this year. All city accounts will join Palo Alto Green Gas program beginning today, so our sales volume will climb considerably. The results will be reported in our next Utilities Quarterly update. That completes my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, unfinished business, none. Let's go on to new business. Item 1, discussion of results of cost effectiveness evaluation of electrification options for appliances and passenger vehicles in single-family residential homes. Just to talk for a moment about how we're going to do things, we're going to have Director Fong, we're going to have a presentation now, right?
Yes.
Bruce and Walt, you guys should think about whether you want to have your comments either after this presentation or after the next item. Your decision on that. What? Well, they can do it both times.
Are you suggesting they wait until?
They're going to, at a minimum, they'll wait until after the presentation. Okay. They can wait until after the presentation and deliver remarks, or they can wait. They want to comment on 1 and 2. I don't know if they want to do that separately or all together, and it's their choice.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
So we have Resource Planner Amy Bailey here, the resident expert on this matter for us.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to present. So this presentation focuses on an analysis that the staff conducted over the last few months, exploring the cost effectiveness of and greenhouse gas emission impact of electrification of single-family homes. So this is not the first time you may have seen a presentation on residential electrification. If you remember, there was another presentation in December 2013 that was kind of a precursor study, or this is an update, an extended study on that. Oh, okay. As you all are very aware, Palo Alto has adopted a number of key climate policies and initiatives. I am only listing a fraction of them up on the slide. The one that I'll point out is a carbon neutral plan. And with that plan, we eliminated greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity use. So in Palo Alto, when you plug in your laptop to a socket, you are not increasing your carbon footprint. After having done that, the city's remaining emissions, over 90% are from natural gas and vehicle transport. Meeting California state emissions reductions targets requires a continued reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And one way to do that, in addition to conservation and energy efficiency, would be to fuel switch to low carbon sources. Given that our electricity supply is carbon neutral, electrification is one pathway to immediately eliminate emissions associated. Sorry.
Ask a question. So when I was reading the report, it seemed to me like one of the things that you were trying to address was the idea of leaks. Is that correct? That there were, I forget the phrase you used, that was, I wrote it down. Fugitive emissions, okay? So so if fugitive emissions are the problem, why are we not plugging the leaks? Since if those are there, they'll, if the leaks are there, they'll be there whether people do fuel switching or not.
So I think that may be a different report you're referring to. This one doesn't cover fugitive emissions.
So the comment about fugitive emissions was in the colleagues' memo, and they were using that to point out, to make the argument that in their opinion, natural gas was only slightly better than coal. And the fugitive emissions they were talking about were fugitive emissions from exploration and production and refining of natural gas, not within the city of Palo Alto.
So that would apply to item 2, maybe, which does respond to the colleagues' memo, not this item.
Aren't they related? I mean, aren't the two things related? Back to the purpose of why we're considering it?
Yeah, I'm not sure that, well, I guess you could say yes. But again, the fugitive emissions would be from, I think, more the natural gas utility. Is that what you're talking about? Not the electric utility?
Okay, maybe I'll find another spot to.
Pardon me, they're outside Palo Alto for the most part. It's in the production and transportation, distribution of natural gas.
So I can say in this analysis, we don't address any fugitive emissions that may be leaking out of the natural gas infrastructure. So, okay. Traditional electric appliances are quite inefficient, so-called electric resistance appliances. Nowadays, though, there are many advanced electric technologies that are highly efficient, and they're becoming more affordable and more available. And the main category, sorry.
Oh, no,
Sorry. Okay.
I'll interrupt you later.
Okay. Okay. The main category I'll refer to is heat pump technologies. So everyone here has a heat pump already in your house. A refrigerator uses a heat pump to remove the heat from the air inside the refrigerator and dump it in the outside. But you can use that same underlying technology for many different applications. For instance, water heating, space heating and cooling, and clothes drying. These are the advanced electric technologies that are being considered in the report, and their use of electric power can be 3 times more efficient than that of an electric resistance technology. And on the left is just an example of a commercially available heat pump water heater. It looks a lot like a regular water heater.
And Amy, maybe I'll ask my question now. Heat pumps depend upon the delta in temperature that you're working with. So I don't know if the data you're using are from climates like Palo Alto or from other climates.
So they do depend on that, and a lot of the heat pump water heating systems and also space heating systems often come with an electric resistance element, so that if the temperature is too low, you can kind of kick in that electric resistance element because they reduce in efficiency. The efficiency of the appliance decreases with lower temperatures. For the amount of energy usage for space heating, the values that I'm using are specific to our climate zone. That being said, based on someone's personal comfort level and behavior, usage can change pretty significantly.
But maybe the other comment worth making here is Palo Alto's climate is really ideally suited for heat pump devices.
Yeah.
It's a great technology for this area.
Okay, another type of advanced electric technology that I'll mention here, although it's not really included so much in this presentation, is induction stoves. So many people really like gas stoves. They're much more responsive, of course, than one of the electric coil stoves. The induction stove is an advanced electric technology that is efficient and has a response time that's more similar to a gas stove. And so that's another technology that is included in the scope of the analysis, and you can see results from that in the full report.
I probably should have said this earlier. Is there any way we can go through the whole presentation and you hold your questions? Because we've done this many times internally, and we notice her presentation gets really long, but if we had just waited, a lot of the questions are answered later. So if you could bear with us, that would be great.
Okay. So here's a summary of the scope of the analysis. This does focus specifically on single-family homes. That being said, many of the appliances could apply in a multifamily, residential, or small commercial setting. And what we're doing is calculating a lifetime cost of ownership for multiple appliances by end use. And actually, we're not considering just appliances, but also passenger vehicles. So the end uses we consider are space heating, water heating, stovetop cooking, and clothes drying. And then we also look at passenger vehicles. We look at the natural gas baseline for the appliance, since the majority of space and water heating in Palo Alto is using natural gas, and compare that cost to the electric alternative. For passenger vehicles, we look at some baseline gasoline car, and then compare that to an electric alternative or plug-in hybrid electric alternative in a similar vehicle class, in the same vehicle class. So we looked at 2 different perspectives, the societal perspective and the customer perspective. The societal perspective in this case is Palo Alto specifically, and that perspective is often used by utilities to consider whether promoting an energy efficiency measure, for instance. And so we kind of adapted that methodology specifically for this case of electrification and fuel switching. We also looked at the customer perspective. So if a household in Palo Alto were to fuel switch, specifically if they were to electrify their home, what are all of the costs and benefits that they as a household would incur? We calculated the lifetime net cost of ownership and a variety of other values, which I'll discuss in the subsequent slides. And we also carried out sensitivity analysis. So some of these appliances can last 20 years. And this calculating the lifetime net cost of ownership, therefore, is based on forecasts of fuel prices for 20 years. So depending on what happens with fossil fuels, with electricity rates, retail rate structures, et cetera, the outcomes can change significantly. So we looked at a bunch of different scenarios, and those scenarios are represented on the result slides in the form of error bars. And all of the default results that I'm showing you are specifically for a new construction scenario. So the installation costs are for new construction, but we'll discuss retrofitting existing buildings on a later slide. Okay, so here again are the end uses that we considered for building appliances, and we looked at the 4 main end uses: water heating, space heating, stovetop cooking, and clothes drying. The baseline in this case is a standard efficiency natural gas appliance. And what we chose as kind of the default electric alternative was the least cost electric alternative option. In some cases, you have more than one option, an electric resistance or a heat pump, for instance, or an induction stove. And so for whatever end use it was, this is what we use as kind of the default switching option. But again, the results for all of the technologies considered are in the full report. For the vehicle analysis, we looked at 3 different sizes of vehicles and considered switching just within each vehicle class. Kind of the idea behind that was if you have an SUV, you need an SUV for your kids or soccer or whatever. And so you don't have the option to downsize. And those again were the electric alternatives were the least cost electric alternatives of all of the vehicles that we analyzed, which are many more than just this list here. But yeah, again, all of the full results for all the vehicles are in the full analysis, in the full report, excuse me. So here's a slide with the main results, and then the subsequent slides go over these in greater detail. First, substituting a gasoline compact car with a Nissan Leaf is cost effective. You would be saving money and then also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Second, first of all, we know almost 90% of residential space and residential natural gas usage is from space and water heating. Electrification of water heating is cost effective using base case assumptions from the customer perspective and close from the societal perspective. And electrification of space heating is close to being cost effective from both perspectives. Fourth, the electric retail rate design will heavily influence whether, from the customer's perspective, electrification is cost effective or not. However, customers can control the cost of their electricity to a certain extent by installing solar PV on site. And fourth, new construction is the best opportunity for electrification, as retrofit costs may be high and there are additional complications for heat pump technologies. So, okay, so here's a summary slide of the societal perspective. And this is a chart of the abatement cost for each end use. This is specifically being referred to as an incremental societal abatement cost. And that is because, in California, we are participating in a compulsory carbon cap and trade market. The price of carbon through that participation in that market is already embedded in these fuel costs. So this incremental is referring to the fact that this is in addition to the price that we're already paying by participating in that market. And yeah, so the first observation, there's one bar that's negative. So that's the compact vehicle. As we discussed before, switching in the compact vehicle class is cost effective, so you'll save money, and resultantly it's a negative abatement cost. Every other bar is positive, but some of them are not as high as others. One thing I will point out is the size of the error bars. And so if you remember on the scope of the analysis slide, we discussed that we performed a sensitivity analysis considering many different scenarios. So those error bars represent the potential range of outcomes, at least of the scenarios that we considered. And the error bars can be very large, as you see there. So that's important to bear in mind as well. So this is the same type of graph, but instead of from the societal perspective, it's from the customer perspective. So this is the incremental customer abatement cost of carbon. And the main difference between the societal perspective and the customer perspective, well, there are two primary differences. One is the utility does offer rebates for some advanced electric technologies. And so the customer is getting those rebates. Those are not included in the societal perspective, since it's just shifting money within what our boundary is for society. But the second and bigger cause of the differences is the fact that the customer is paying retail rates for fuel, whereas we as a society pay marginal supply costs. And so that's what is the main driver for the differences in these values. You'll notice that there are two end uses in this slide that are cost effective: compact vehicle and water heating. And space heating is very close to being cost effective. There are the other two building appliance end uses, stovetop cooking and clothes drying, remain quite high. But the next slide shows that if you look at what a household would be paying on a monthly basis, this is what you end up with. So this is the monthly net cost of electrification to a household. And there are the 4 building end uses, and then also switching to a compact car. And when you add everything together, it results in a net savings of $9 a month, but using base case assumptions. Most of that savings is from electrification of your vehicle, but there is some savings from water heating. And the point I wanted to make is, even though stovetop cooking and clothes drying is certainly looks very expensive from an abatement cost perspective, if you just look at the monthly cost, it's relatively modest, or could be considered modest. Okay. So from the customer perspective, the retail rate design for electricity can strongly impact the results. So here what I'm showing is just for the building appliances, the 4 different end uses. And this is the annualized net cost of ownership. And the very left bar in each of the different clusters is the annual net cost of ownership for the natural gas baseline appliance. The middle bar in each of the clusters is the electric alternative that we are using, the default alternative, using base case assumptions. The third bar in each cluster is that same technology, the same electric alternative, but instead of using the base case assumptions, which based on usage patterns in Palo Alto would be tier 3 rates, we used average rates without imposing any specific rate structure. And so you'll notice that the third bar in each cluster is significantly lower than the middle bar. This graph is the same as the graph before, but I've added a 4th bar to each cluster. So the 4th bar is combining electrification with on-site PV. So in this case, instead of meeting the extra electricity from electrification from the grid at some retail rate, you're meeting it from the levelized cost of electricity from an on-site solar PV system. So you'll notice the 4th bar is lower than the 2nd bar, which is using the base case assumptions. However, at current costs of PV, it is higher than using average rates. So they would be better off in that case getting the extra electricity from the grid. So new construction is the more cost-effective time to, as opposed to retrofitting. Retrofitting a building can be very expensive and can incur significant upfront costs. If you need to upgrade your electrical panel, that can be $2,000 to $5,000. If you need to run conduit to an appliance location, and depending on what appliance, if you have to change the space in some way, it may be up to $2,000, depending on the configuration of your house and whether you're combining it with other work, whether you have to do duct work, et cetera. Additionally, heat pumps, air source heat pumps, do have some unique requirements as well. Since they are getting heat from the surrounding air, you actually have to have a lot of air surrounding it. So if you have your water heater in a closet, you wouldn't be able to put a heat pump water heater there. So it requires around 1,000 cubic feet of space, about a single car garage. It also dehumidifies and cools the surrounding air, which potentially could be a benefit. And they do produce some noise. And because they're dehumidifying the air, they require a condensate line. So all of these things add up to, complicating retrofitting existing buildings. So the last results slide is just looking at a citywide basis. So on the y-axis, I'm showing the incremental societal abatement cost again. So these are actually the same values that I showed you in the previous chart. And on the x-axis is the abatement potential. So across Palo Alto, in all of the single-family homes, we estimated that around 18,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent is used for water heating. So if you were to completely electrify everything, that would be the amount of greenhouse gas emission savings. And for space heating, the estimate is up there. So I'll just make one observation. The lower hanging fruit in this case is water heating and space heating. So they have the lower abatement cost, but also they have a much greater abatement potential. Again, it's over 90% of residential natural gas usage. So that kind of supports the city's, or guides the city's work plan for focusing on those two end uses. Okay, I've listed a few recommended next steps, but this is something that will be discussed in more detail in the next agenda item. So I think in that case, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks very much, Amy. That's an excellent, very well-written report, and thank you for the presentation here on an important topic. So we're going to do questions, but let's hold on a sec, and we'll do public comment first, and then we'll do questions. So, Bruce, you want to lead off?
Sure. Good evening. Bruce Hodge from Carbon Free Palo Alto. I wanted to thank Amy and Shiva for what we consider to be a very excellent analysis and report and presentation as well. And we're pleased that the staff revisited the fuel switching cost-benefit analysis and responded to our comments and incorporated our feedback. So we appreciate that very much. We believe that the existing analysis is a very solid analysis overall. And it also features more nuanced sections that examine the factors that influence cost effectiveness. That was lacking in the previous report. And I'm hopeful that together we can influence factors that tilt us towards the everything favors electrification scenario that was presented in the report. One of the things that, as Amy has pointed out, is that the utility rate structure is hopefully under our control, and it's something that has a big impact upon the overall cost effectiveness. She presented some results that showed the retail rate at the average rate, but we believe that we could potentially even go below the average retail rate in a rate structure redesign. And so one of the mechanisms that we've identified that we believe would be somewhat easier in terms of the rate structure design would be to allow for a carve-out, a monthly carve-out in terms of kilowatt hours per device that is allowed to customers, and then they would be charged. So customers with a fuel switch device, a qualifying heat pump or device or an EV would be assessed at a lower rate to be determined. The TOU is another mechanism for doing that, but we're in the middle of a very long pilot program. There is cost associated with rolling out TOU, and the timelines right now are pretty long. So carve-out would be something that we could take a look at in the short term. the all-electric house initiative. I just wanted to call out that. I think that's a fine initiative, but I believe that we should also be focusing on a continuous electrification of our existing rolling stock. And as Amy pointed out, there's a lot of challenges associated with the retrofitting. And believe me, I know, because I do have a heat pump water heater installed in my house, and I also have a Nissan Leaf. They've both been very good experiences, but it's been a little challenging getting those installed. And lastly, the end-of-life replacement. So this is a metric that we feel is very important. In the end, what we're really talking about is replacing these existing devices that are using fossil fuels. So unless we're able to influence the end-of-life replacement rate at a very high rate, like 80% or even greater, then I don't believe that we're going to be able to hit the kinds of goals that we need to be hitting. So I'll speak more about that for agenda item number 2.
I just want to clarify one point. You indicated or you recommended a carve-out for devices or electrifying devices. Are you recommending that, and I just want to make sure we understand your point, are you recommending that for new devices or existing, well, I'm sure you're recommending it for new devices. Are you also recommending it for existing devices? For example, the heat pump, if someone already has it, would it apply, or would it only apply?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. I don't think there's very many, so there's maybe 3 in the whole city. But EV owners would certainly benefit from this carve-out rate.
Got it.
And that would be, the amount of carve-out would be something that staff would need to investigate and decide what would be, a reasonable carve-out rate. That would be, again, measured in kilowatt hours per month.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Basically, I don't have that much to add to what Bruce said because we're both active in carbon-free Palo Alto. One thing that I think is not really that thoroughly analyzed is the idea with all this electrification, if you have a tier system, it's going to be more expensive for people. And so I think some emphasis needs to be placed on that early to make sure that when people consider doing these things, they don't automatically get a major increase in their electric rates. That'd be the only thing I would add to what Bruce said.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, colleagues, let's go to questions. Anyone want to start?
Oh, yeah, just
Go ahead,
with
Mike.
respect to the comments, if I understand correctly, the cost of service analysis program was approved at the last meeting. We said in phase 2 of that, the department would consider rate schedules that might not be tied, that with voter approval could go beyond pure cost. Is that correct? And so that's where these carve-outs could be considered in that second phase? Thank you.
Yes.
Not just questions, but comments now also?
Questions and comments, sure.
Sure. First of all, thanks to Amy Bailey and Shiva Swaminathan for a wonderful analysis and report and presentation. Just a terrific job. Energy efficiency and renewable energy and reducing our carbon footprint are all good and important. And like I said, the report is excellent. But I actually believe that the report is much more about energy efficiency than it is about its stated goal of reducing carbon emissions. And I'll explain why I think this is actually not so much about reducing carbon emissions in a moment. Also, I think there are some important details that matter a lot, and I'd like to comment on a couple of those. Staffs compared the cost of heat pump water heaters and space heaters with conventional electric and gas heaters, and they found that the initial cost is much higher for heat pumps, and the operating cost is much lower. The operating cost is lower because heat pump technology is vastly improved in the last several years, and it's remarkably efficient, as Amy pointed out. And as a result of this high efficiency, switching to heat pump water heaters and space heaters is a good thing, and we should find ways to encourage it. By the way, switching from gas water heaters and space heaters to conventional resistance electric water heaters and space heaters is not a good idea, because these conventional electric units are much less efficient than heat pump units. As good as heat pump water heaters and space heaters are, they're not perfect. They cost 2 to 3 times more than equivalent conventional electric units. They also take up more space. They make more noise. And they produce cold air, which won't be welcome inside the home in the winter. Nonetheless, because they're very efficient, I think we should encourage the use of heat pump water heaters and space heaters, even though they're more expensive, because this higher efficiency reduces total energy demand and it's good for the environment. Switching from conventional gas water heaters and space heaters to heat pump units will increase our use of electricity. Here in Palo Alto, we're justifiably proud of our zero carbon electric supply that we've achieved with renewable sources like hydro, wind, solar, geothermal, and landfill gas to electricity. But Palo Alto gets its electricity from the grid, and we depend on our ability to buy and sell electricity on the grid. As many of you know, there's now so much solar energy production in the state that there's relatively less demand for power from conventional power generators in the middle of the day when the sun is shining. But early in the morning and late in the afternoon, there's a need to run conventional power plants in order to meet demand for electricity. People often call this the duck curve because the way it's plotted, at least to some people, it looks like a duck. In California, more than half of our total electricity is supplied by fossil fuels, gas, coal, and oil. And in fact, 44% of our electricity comes from natural gas-fired power plants. This dependence on natural gas power plants is going to get worse, not better, as more people switch from natural gas water heaters and space heaters to heat pump units, and as more people operate electric vehicles. Ironically, switching to heat pump heaters and EVs increases demand for electricity and may even force California to build more natural gas-fired power plants. The City Council colleagues' memo states that natural gas is only slightly better for the environment than coal due to fugitive emissions, but that's a controversial statement, not a fact. Recent research on natural gas emissions has found that in many cases, they come from leaky valves and other components at energy refineries. And so we can anticipate that the amount of fugitive emissions will decrease in the future as people get better at identifying them and correcting them. My concern is not with the general gist of this, but about overly simplistic thinking and also the loss of personal freedom. I'll come back to that in a moment. I'd like to see us educate people about heat pump technology. I'd like to see us make it easier for people to adopt heat pump technology, but I don't think electrification is a simple and straightforward way to reduce our carbon footprint. So how can we encourage people to adopt heat pump technology? I believe on-bill financing is the best way for the city to support expanded use of these expensive systems. Our current billing system doesn't support on-bill financing. Our current billing system doesn't support a whole lot of other things we've wanted to do during the last several years. I believe it's time to take a look at implementing a new billing system that's more flexible, powerful, and capable of supporting innovative and effective programs like on-bill financing. In the meantime, we can use rebates as a poor substitute. As we also just heard from one of our speakers, there aren't a whole lot of heat pump units in use now. I'm not suggesting that it's a particularly new or risky technology, but there aren't a lot of people in Palo Alto with experience with them. We might want to think about setting up a trial, demonstration, and evaluation program for heat pump units, much like what we've done with LED street lighting during the last couple of years. One of the virtues of heat pumps is they enable efficient heating and air conditioning. So many people will opt to install combination space heating and air conditioning units. We'll have to design our incentive system carefully to avoid the unintended consequence of subsidizing the installation of air conditioners in homes that don't currently have air conditioning. Similarly, we should design our system to only incentivize heat pump units, but not the much lower efficiency, conventional resistance electric water heaters and space heaters. I'm particularly concerned about a slippery slope to the loss of personal freedom. None of us in this room would mandate that people buy smaller cars that use less fuel, or eat less meat to reduce water consumption, or live in smaller homes. Similarly, I don't think we should mandate how people heat their domestic water or heat or cool their homes. I've heard some rumors that Palo Alto might require new residential construction to be all electric, and I think that's an awful idea. I think our building codes and regulations should be designed to provide options like electric service that's compatible with plug-in EVs and compatible with heat pump water heaters and space heaters. But I also think we should go on providing natural gas service to all homes. We should also provide recycled water systems. They're also more economic if installed when the home is built or remodeled. But I think the purpose of our building codes should be to provide options and flexibility for the future by incorporating capabilities during construction when it's most economic to do so. But I don't believe that we want building codes or policies that take away options by mandating or limiting behavior. Thanks.
Commissioner Eglash, thank you for your comments. I have comments on your comments, but let's continue down the line and get everyone's comments, and before we get to comments on comments. Commissioner Cook, do you have thoughts you want to chime in with?
Nothing as eloquent or well thought through as Commissioner Eglash, but I do have some questions and comments. Thank you for the presentation, and thanks for doing the research on this. I have a couple sort of general questions and then some specific ones. So generally, none of this effort, or this effort wouldn't be as powerful if other departments within the city weren't also looking at doing these things. And so I wanted to make sure that the utilities department isn't bearing the entire burden of trying to make the city a greener place and a less carbon intensive place. So for things like the building codes, I assume that the Planning Commission and the Planning Department and the Building Department are looking at those things. And for things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions on transportation, that not only is the City of Palo Alto Utilities looking at greening their fleet and renting cleaner cars, but also that other departments are also considering their fleets, and that we're also considering ways that we might help reduce the amount of emissions that come from people commuting to and from the city, and that we would also consider lobbying with entities that are not controlled by the city to create a greener public transportation fleet.
If I could just make a comment, thank you very much for raising those points. So these efforts are all being conducted under the umbrella of the city manager, and yes, he is very cognizant of the fact that it has to be a holistic approach with many different prongs, and he is definitely on board with that, and in fact has also charged our chief sustainability officer with making sure there's appropriate identification and then two, coordination.
Great, thank you. I also would just suggest that we look to see if any other cities have successfully implemented any of these policies. I didn't see anything in the report, maybe I missed it, but I understand from some friends that the city of Quebec is doing quite a bit with their transportation, but also that a lot of homes in Quebec are electrified. I understand there are differences with a number of things, with geography, the history of what people have done. So if electrification was started in a city 50 years ago, it doesn't necessarily apply to how we would do it here. But I would just ask that you take a look at that. And then I have my only other question is, what are the assumptions? The assumptions are listed in the report, but could you explain the assumptions on the future prices of electricity and natural gas?
So for the retail rates specifically, those are using retail rate projections. moving forward for around 15 years, and then I just extrapolated for the last 5 years. The commodity component of it for natural gas is using a forward price curve for that commodity component, and it's using for the carbon contribution to that, which is pretty small, that's using the price floor, the carb cap and trade market. It's consistent with the financial plans.
Okay, great. I just wanted to check because obviously those assumptions could have a huge difference in how you compare the two. That's all I have. Thank you very much. And thanks again for both the effort that took in creating this report, but also in the presentation. And I'm glad that we're talking about it today. Thanks.
Commissioner Schwartz?
Hi, so I'll say thank you also for all the effort and ideas. I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Eglash talked about in terms of the unintended consequences, and it seems like there might be an opportunity to, in terms of helping the City Council make decisions about what are good recommendations, is I didn't see a curve that showed the projected adoption patterns of any of the abatement measures. And so if one assumed that they were adopted, what would be the impact on the aggregate electricity that we would purchase, and what would be the impact of procuring the generation and associated RECs needing to support the load, because as was pointed out, if we now have a peak, right now we have a very flat curve. If we now have peaks in the early morning hours and in the evenings, early evening, then that is going to be much more expensive and carbon intensive electricity. We're not going to be getting that from solar. So that's one thing that I think should be in the report to the City Council. The other question that I have is, did you consider the cost of transmission and distribution upgrades that might be required to support the additional load in the city?
So this is just for single-family residential cases, and residential, well, the residential demand is around 20% of our total electricity demand, and all of these substations, I think, are 50 to 60% loaded. So we did take that into consideration, but because our distribution system is very overbuilt, it would, at least for single-family residential, it would not have a significant.
Yeah, but I mean, if you added, 5,000 EVs and you took houses that, that are basically doing all their heating from gas, and you're switching them over, to say that there'd be no impact seems not.
I would, and Amy will be better to speak to this, but I'll say this. Sure, there could be an impact on a circuit, on some of the circuits. But again, the major expenditure would be at the substation, and right now it looks like the substations can handle a lot of this. We have built in a fair amount of capacity. We don't run them to the capacity limit at all. But we do recognize that in certain clusters, some circuits might have to be upgraded, not transmission level, only distribution level. We don't really have any transmission level stuff here. So that only say that just so that you understand the cost implication.
Yeah, I'll also just point out that we did look at this previously when we were talking about the adoption rates of EVs, and so the street level transformers are also well suited for a certain amount of addition.
So hold on, I just want to make sure we're all clear on this. We're saying transmission, meaning high voltage coming into the city, would not be an issue. Maybe distribution, low voltage around the city in places could be an issue. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we monitor the circuits on an ongoing basis anyway, and so as we see that they're getting closer to their limit, we will go in there and we'll upgrade them.
I mean, I guess I'm, from a logical standpoint, if we were going to add, if we're going to make a big enough change to have it be significant for the environment, then I can't believe it's not a big enough change that it would be significant for our distribution system. I mean, I just can't.
So I guess the other thing you had mentioned was rates, and what are we going to do when we have to procure more generation and we have to look at the impact there in our procurement activities. And I'd say to you, one of the charges would be to figure out how to do rates so that we actually flatten the loads as much as possible. And that, again, is a mitigating factor from a peak demand perspective.
But I don't think you can use rates to, when you get up in the morning and it's cold, you want to put the heat on. I mean, and so it's either gas heat or it's electric heat.
But you don't have to plug in your car. So, maybe it's better to plug in your car at a certain time of day, in the middle of the day when there's solar, I don't know.
That's not what I'm trading. I'm not trading if I don't have an electric
But it's a
vehicle-
cumulative effect. So you mentioned all the
Right.
EVs that could impact
Okay.
a circuit. So it's a
Okay, I'm sorry.
cumulative effect of all the load. And so what I'm saying is, we would definitely look at how we design rates and be intelligent about trying to manage people's reaction to price signals.
Yes, I would hope that you would design rates that would pay attention, but I think my point is that we need to consider that we would be changing the load pattern significantly for the city. So it's like Eugene, okay, which has a lot of electric heat there. They have a huge spike, winter spike in the mornings. I mean, that's when their peak load is. They don't have a hot afternoon, summer peak. They have a winter peak. So I'm just saying that if we have this nice flat load, if we make a big change, we would change our pattern.
So I hear you all, and I think that these are things that we will also not necessarily look at before we take this to the council, but definitely look at over time, because even if the council were to say, let's adopt a policy that encourages this kind of migration, particularly for customers that already might own some appliances that are gas-fired, they're not going to all change overnight. That's not probably going to happen. And even with having new construction being all electric, even that's going to take some time to actually start to have any sort of impact on the system, because it's not a big bang theory here when people switch everything over.
Okay,
So it just kind of have to be realistic about, what is the deployment rate here, and it's not going to be big bang.
Okay, well then I think it would be nice to see a curve to see what you think the adoption is and the trade-off between what's happening for greenhouse gas reductions compared to what the other issues are. Then another question I have is, have you evaluated resiliency and risk profile issues so as they might impact ratepayers? So for example, if you could have a small electric emergency generator, would give you enough power to operate a gas-fueled or solar water heater or forced air furnace if we had a big blackout. But if you're all electric, then you're just out of luck and you can't cook or do anything else. And so have you considered that in terms of how you've looked at this, the resiliency issue?
Did you consider it? I mean, I do think that's a consequence, but we'll allow Amy to respond.
So it is something that was discussed and thought about. Nothing is included in the report, I think, that addresses that issue. I mean, we're kind of lucky where we are, where we don't have hurricanes and some other natural disasters that they have on the East Coast, where they can, where resiliency is very important.
I think Shia has a comment to make. Go for it.
A couple of things. Shiva from Utilities. In terms of resiliency, I think I go back to Commissioner Iglesias' comment. We are not eliminating people's choices. We're just providing information and encouraging or showing the pros and cons of this technology. So people, if they are concerned about it, they don't have to to switch over. So that's one part. In terms of impact on the grid, to give a scale, we're about 1,100 EVs in town now over the last 3 years. We've changed out 2 or 3 distribution transformers, and there are no major issues related to that. So the amount of electricity a EV uses is about a third of what a typical home uses. And what we're talking about here is also about the same scale. So until we get from 3 to 1,000 or 15, we are not too worried about the immediate impact on the grid, or even on the distribution grid. And on the Eugene's case, in the Northwest, it's mainly electric resistance heating. We are not talking about electric resistance heating here. It's a heat pump technology.
Okay, and then finally, have you looked at sort of how you sort of, if you basically have a base of a number of, if you cut in half the number of people who are using natural gas, you then have to socialize the cost across everybody else who's still using it, or you have to have an issue of stranded assets. So has the analysis taken that into account?
That will be a reality if that ever came to pass, that's true.
I'm sorry.
You're correct in pointing it out. That would be something we'd have to consider over time. We didn't, it's not part of this study.
In other words, in theory, as more people electrify, a smaller rate base
That's correct.
is paying the fixed costs.
That's absolutely correct.
Got it.
And then have you thought about a funding plan? So if, you talked about a 4% interest rate, which is kind of hard to get, would the city help fund people buying EVs or electric heat pumps or things like that so that you could buy these things at the kind of costs you're talking about in the study?
I don't know, maybe there should be a ballot measure and we should put a tax on folks. No.
Well, I'm going to speculate the city is not likely to subsidize EVs. On the other hand, for things, the city certainly has provided rebates for certain energy efficiency.
See, that's not from, I don't know how we look at the city. I'm not quite sure what Commissioner Schwartz, if she meant the general fund or if she meant the utility. So certainly rebates have come from the appropriate utility to encourage efficient use of appliances.
Appliances, but that's generally been the appliance space. I don't think there's ever been discussion of doing so for electric vehicles.
Definitely not.
I don't imagine there's any reason the city couldn't do so, but I'm just speculating. It is, we don't have a representative from the city attorney's office. Wait, I'm sorry, say again?
There were very favorable rates quoted there that it's not that easy to get so I was curious if that was part of how they were doing it, was that there'd be some kind of group effort to be able to get something at that good a rate.
Got it. Hang tight for 1 sec. Before we keep going here, do you guys have any comments? Amy, you look like you were about to say something. You good? Or go for it if you have something to say. We're all friends here. Okay. Shiva, anything else you want to add to that? Mike?
Yeah, a couple things. Thank you. First, thank you also for the excellent report. I do agree with Commissioner Eglass that it is a lot about efficiency. I feel good that we get carbon neutral electricity, but I know when I plug my electric car in at night, it's drawing power from the grid that's not solar powered. What I don't see in here is comparison of measures, other measures that would reduce energy use, such as insulation and better windows for buildings. Is there a way to build that into, has that been considered, or is just outside the scope of this report?
So it's outside the scope of this report, but certainly all of the retail rate projections, are dependent upon the 10-year energy efficiency plan and meeting the local solar plan goals. So all of those initiatives are really embedded in these calculations. And so it is dependent, these values that you're seeing are dependent upon kind of all of those initiatives, I'd say.
My guess is that we reduce more carbon with $1 million spent on insulation and windows than we do on electric heat pumps, but it's something we should keep in mind. With respect to funding improvements, if they're the right way to go, has the city looked at the PACE program ever? Property Assessed Clean Energy? I'm sure they have, and look at Val's grin. Yes, it's probably been discussed at length.
So Palo Alto is a participant of the California First program, which is one of the PACE programs, and we've also looked into the HERO program as well. My understanding is that it hasn't been, hugely popular, but yeah, that's my understanding of it. But we are a member of that program.
So homeowners could use that to put in place some of these appliances?
Certainly PV and is it energy efficiency? So yeah, I think so.
So we do have a funding mechanism, potentially.
Yeah, it's available to residents. I don't think they've really had opted to take advantage of many of these. Typically, the interest rate is so high, they just either fund it themselves or, honestly, quite a few folks here have the wherewithal to also do that and not worry about the funding, but we do have that, we have signed up for that program, the PACE-related program.
I think it's more valuable to people who may not stay in their homes as long. Thank you.
Am I up? Okay, my turn. Commissioner Eglash, thank you for your comments. I had a couple of, I felt a couple of key takeaways. One was, not that you said it this way, but be careful what you wish for. Mm-hmm. And we get everyone to switch to electrify, and now we have to go build a bunch of, ironically, natural gas-fired power plants to go provide the electricity from all these people who've gotten off of natural gas. Was I sort of understanding your comments correctly? Or part of your comments correctly?
Right. We don't yet have a very smart grid. We don't yet have energy storage. We don't yet have very pervasive practical demand response systems or dispatchable loads. We'll get those things, but it's hard to know whether we'll get them in 5 years or in 15 years. And until we have them, we certainly, in the city of Palo Alto, depend on not just our renewable sources, but on a bunch of fossil fuel sources as well.
So I'd be interested in feedback from utility department staff, as well as from Carbon Free Palo Alto when you guys come up, is how to address that point. I mean, that's not, if we are trying to reduce our greenhouse emissions, but to Commissioner Eglash's point, the result of electrification is simply to increase our demand upon the grid and getting conventional electricity off the grid. I will say that my bias is I would prefer his analysis to be wrong, and so I'm trying to figure out how that might be. So the question, of course, if we are carbon-free, and we remain carbon-free, and I'm thinking out loud here, so just bear with me, and our use of electricity increases, and now we're buying more renewables, but there's time of day issues, I think is what you're saying, so at certain times of day, I mean, if we're carbon-free in the electricity, we're carbon-free, I think, but Commissioner Schwartz is shaking her head and saying no. So why are we not carbon-free? Say tomorrow, I wave my magic wand, natural gas goes away, we're all electricity, Director Fong and the team goes out and buys a whole lot more renewables, why are we not carbon-free?
Because part of it's an accounting thing. I mean, the electrons that we get at a given time of day are created by
no doubt.
Whatever is producing the electrons.
We have increased our demand for electrons by 100. I'm keeping the math simple. And admittedly, those electrons could be coming from anywhere, including conventional power. But we have gone out and added 100 more electrons from renewable sources.
But electrons, in the absence of large-scale storage,
yes,
okay,
we'll ignore
to address the
right.
duck curve, okay, and other things like the duck curve, until you address those, the electrons that have to be used in real time, it's just-in-time creation and just-in-time usage. And so if we want to use an electron at 6 o'clock in the morning, or we want to use one at 10 o'clock at night, it wasn't created from a solar field that we have a power purchase agreement from.
So I'm going to let you guys get a word in edgewise on this in a moment, but just for a sec, just bear with me. So we use 100 more electrons here in Palo Alto because of our reduced natural gas use. We go pay someone to generate 100 more electrons of renewable energy. Somehow I feel that means there's not 100 more electrons generated from natural gas. But you're disagreeing with me on that.
If that's what if California ISO and the California Public Power are looking at sort of what's available to put in the supply, so the demand says we need X amount of electricity, they're going to put in whatever available sources are there.
At any given moment. But looking over the totality of the year, so now, Amy, your opportunity to respond to this. If we, and Shiva or Val or Jane or anyone, well, hang on, let's let the utility staff take a crack at it. If we are increasing our use of electricity, or even our chief sustainability officer may have a comment on it, if we are increasing our use of electricity because we are electrifying, converting to electric appliances and the like, and our electric supply is carbon neutral, are we increasing greenhouse gas emission somehow or other in some way because at certain times of day or whatever, we're taking electricity off the grid that may come from conventional sources?
Can I suggest that Commissioner Eglash should speak before me?
Wow, interesting. Go for it, Commissioner Eglash.
Sure, I'll give it a try, but you're right. We have lots of experts in the room here who can help us to untangle this. I believe the current penetration of solar energy in California is such that we are using, across the state, all of the electricity produced by our solar panels. To the best of my knowledge, we're not yet throwing any of that away or putting it to less than optimum use. That is indeed happening in other parts of the world, so it is possible to get to penetration of photovoltaics where in the middle of the day you're generating so much electricity that you simply can't put it to good use. There are parts of the world where the price of electricity, the instantaneous price actually drops to zero or goes negative because of the large penetration of solar, but I don't believe anything like that's happening in California yet. So I think what you're saying, that all of these renewable resources that we have are still providing kilowatt hours that are being used somewhere, I think is still correct in California. Also, of course, a lot of these renewable supplies are running 24 hours a day. Geothermal, landfill gas to electricity, hydro, and to some degree wind is complementary with solar. So all of that helps. But it is solar that's growing fastest, and it is solar that's going to grow faster than the rest as the state moves to meet ever more aggressive RPS and carbon standards. But even in this situation where we're using all of the kilowatt hours coming out of solar panels, it's still true that we're not generating enough renewable energy at every hour of every day when we need electricity. So it's still true that we are fortunate to have some fossil fuel-fired power plants, even in Palo Alto, to give us electricity at times of day when our renewable resources aren't generating enough. So even today, I believe that's true. We have experts in the room that can tell us. But I think if you created an imaginary microgrid where the city of Palo Alto could only draw electricity from the resources that we have PPAs with or we own, I think we would be very unhappy. I think there would be times when there wouldn't be enough electricity.
Particularly now with the drought.
Particularly with the drought, which is reducing the amount of hydro, and so the drought makes it worse. So that's the situation today. I think many of the things that were just said will become issues in the relatively near future, single-digit years, not decades, as there's more and more solar in the state. And so it could actually be, if we deploy solar faster than we figure out how to do dispatchable loads or storage, that we actually get to the point where sometimes we just choose to throw electricity away, but I don't believe we're there yet.
So here's my view on the situation. I believe that under the current regime, as we increase the use of electricity in Palo Alto, we will increase our renewable purchases and remain carbon-free. As a result, there will be periods of time when the electricity we demand here will not be met entirely by renewable supplies. We will use, and I'm sure that's true today, and we will use natural gas or conventional sources. On the other hand, the net balance over the course of the year is there will be exactly as the same amount that we generate when we don't need it, and someone else somewhere in the state basically gets to use that thanks to us, so that our overall balance works out neutrally. Now, I do realize that if and when we get to the point where there are periods of time when we are generating renewable electricity that nobody anywhere can use, so we're throwing it away, then that analysis begins to break down, although we're not there yet. All right, let me make a few more comments on things. My general takeaway is I am supportive of moving towards an electrified future, understanding the challenges and so on and so forth. In my mind, there are three options from a high level on doing this. One is don't try and do it at all. Two is encourage people to do it, rebates, education, this and that. And three is mandate. And there are pros and cons, and with all of these things, there are different levels of them. Mandate for new construction, mandate for retrofits, and so on and so forth. So it's a complicated situation. I think we should think of it that way. I'm supportive of looking at all the options. Commissioner English, one place where I may disagree with you a little bit is on the issue of under what circumstances mandates are appropriate. The other key takeaway I took from your comments were that mandates basically are not appropriate, in the sense that, you know, people should have the right to, you know, have their natural gas fire appliance or whatever else. I do not 100% agree with you on that. I would use compact fluorescent bulbs and incandescent bulbs as an example. You know, we've banned incandescent bulbs, and when I say we, I don't mean Palo Alto, more generally. And I think I'm fine with that. So that's just stating my position as one person here, that I'm open to that. So those are my comments. Any other comments from the commissioners? Shiva, you look like you were going to say something. Do you have something you wanted to add to all of that? No? Okay. All right. Unless I'm mistaken, we are now...
Walt was going to comment.
Oh, Walt, come on up.
Walt Hayes, member of Carbon Free Palo Alto. You know, I think that this kind of ignores the basic context here, and that is that we are really facing a crisis in terms of climate change. And so, you know, taking little gradual, small steps really is not going to be enough to do it. That's number one. Number two, as Val pointed out, with everything that's been talked about here, it's going to take a long time before Palo Alto is totally electrified. And at the same time, the state is moving very rapidly toward more renewable energy of various kinds, and also research into storage. So the threat that Commissioner Eglash talked about, I think, is far in the future, and by that time, I don't think it'll be a threat. And then on the question about personal freedom, I thought that was a little bit extreme. I mean, if you are mandated in a new house to have all electric appliances, a person who doesn't like to do that can buy a house that doesn't have those things. So it seems to me that seems like a really small quibble when you're talking about the overall threat that we're facing, where we have to take as many actions as we possibly can if we don't want to face disaster. So I hope you'll keep that in mind.
Thank you for those comments. I'm going to expand upon my points to say that I am, the idea of requiring new construction to be all electric is a very appealing one to me. I do understand that mandating that, you know, the idea of turning off natural gas service to existing houses is more challenging, you know, something to be discussed. But I am supportive of the idea of looking at that for new construction. I do also would say that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, what Palo Alto does not matter that much for the world as a whole, whether we electrify or don't in the grand scheme of things. But I do think, as the only utility in the state, or the only city in the state of California that operates all utilities municipally, our ability to serve as a model for others is important. And I would err on the side of pushing to try and get to a result, even if it's not quite perfect and so on and so forth, where we can say, hey, this can be done and a community can operate carbon neutral, not just in the electric supply, but elsewhere. Okay. Oh, Commissioner Schwartz.
Yes, I'd like to make, so if the goal is to try and do what's right for the environment, I agree with Commissioner English that I think that mandating new houses be all electric is a simplistic approach. And I think, so I just looked up, you know, what the mix is for the state of California. Okay, so solar is 1.82% of the generation resources. Oh, you've got it right there. Okay, yes. Okay, so we're talking about, and this is a big, because it used to be when you saw the charts that come from EPRI that show the wedge of the different resources, solar didn't even show up. So now it's approaching 2%. So while it's very emotionally appealing, it's just renewables altogether here on this chart is 20%, okay? And we are ahead of like every other state except maybe Oregon or something. But so we're ahead of everybody, but it's not realistic to run a modern society on renewables at this point. And for, to say that in 5 years it's going to be different, I think is unrealistic. I mean, I think that we're building more things.
But what is the downside, just to play devil's advocate, what's the downside to a new house being all electric?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily more efficient. And as somebody who, when I rebuilt my house.
Not more efficient, it's carbon neutral.
Yeah, but I think if you're looking at the total picture, you can see there's more than one way to approach it. And that if you want, it's like what Mike said, if everybody made their houses really efficient and had great insulation and whatever, that would probably do more to help the environment than necessarily not having a gas stove, okay? And so I just think that you're using a blunt instrument to achieve your goal. I think there are other ways that are more subtle, and I would try to get, I even thought it was interesting that you were converting people from a Prius to an all-electric vehicle. I'm very in favor of electrification of transportation. I want to get the people with the old gas guzzlers to go. I'm not worried about converting the Prius owners.
See, that's something we can all agree on. So now, Commissioner Cook, your challenge now is to come up with something that will bring everyone together on this issue.
I don't know if I can do that, but we will be having an action item immediately following this, so maybe we can get into that. But I will just point out that Commissioner Schwartz is skeptical that anything can happen in the next 5 years to change this. But I will point out that the numbers that she's looking at are the 18+% numbers are from 2013, and in fact, those numbers will be 33% in 5 years. So there's a radical change that is happening. So those numbers that you're looking at are old already, and they will change by a lot. So this 18% number is going to go to 33%. So it's a huge change. Your 1.8% that you're pointing out about solar is now 5%, and I would be willing to guess that it'll be 15% probably by the end of the decade. And of course, I'm biased. And not only will we be at 33%, in 5 years, so your 5-year number, but in 10 years after that, it's quite likely that we'll be at 50%. So we will be testing the limits of a modern society, but a lot of people have been working on this, and I believe a lot of thought has gone into it, and we've got a good example with Germany, and we'll be doing very well. So I bring this up because I just want to point out that those numbers are very important, and the numbers are radically changing. And I will also bring it up in light of Walt Hayes' comments that, I too believe that we need to do as much as we can across the board to deal with a much larger problem than the question of whether or not circuits will be overloaded on blocks, in several blocks of Palo Alto. We're fighting climate change. It's going to cause a lot more problems than some circuits getting possibly overloaded before we can catch them and rebuild.
I assure you, we will not allow the circuits to be overloaded. And I will also note that you make some really good points about how quickly we're moving to a renewable portfolio. Remind all of you that you played a big role in moving us to a 50% portfolio by 2017, 50% renewable portfolio by 2017. With that said, I would note the time.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Did we ever actually get staff feedback on the issue of whether electrifying, in your opinion, reduces our greenhouse?
We'd like to decline and just have you guys debate it. We don't, I mean.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're going to do what we can to keep the electric portfolio carbon neutral.
That's okay, that's fine. You guys are going to, Gil, are you prepared to comment on that, either in your presentation on the issue of whether electrifying in Palo Alto would reduce greenhouse gas emissions on an overall basis?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Follow Alto clear on this. I think not yet for us to answer that.
Okay.
We'll have things to say about that in coming months.
Okay. Okay. So I see a hand. Now, you said you wanted to speak on item 2. So you are welcome to speak now. We're finishing item 1. You can speak now, or you can speak on 2, or you can do both.
And in any event, please identify yourself.
Yes. Hi, my name is Hiromi Kelty. I should disclose that I do work for utilities, but I'm here tonight as a resident. I am highly appreciating this discussion tonight. And I do want to address your comment about, for example, would it make any dent in all of this if new construction were mandated to go all electric? I live in a house that's 115 years old. It is not energy efficient at all. We've done everything possible to make it as energy efficient as possible. We are now in the process of redesigning our house to go electric, all electric. And I guess, first I want to point out, yes, we can, if one person can make a difference, we have to each start with ourselves. Our house now with PVs, our electricity bill is at 0 for half of the year. I mean, how could you say that that doesn't cause a huge dent? We are producing our own electricity, and we're doing great. Now, the reason why I am here and wanting to comment is that as we're redesigning our house to go all electric, we're finding that there are many hurdles in place. One of the big ones is with the development center and the green building ordinance and the rule that Palo Alto homes should be 15% above Title 24, which is great for the traditional home with gas and electric. But for a house trying to go all electric, our load is going to increase significantly. And I don't even know if we'll meet that 15%. We're doing everything possible to try to meet that. But that's one. The other thing is, so our electricity load will increase. We can't add more solar panels to our roof to meet that. So the cost of increasing our load and the permitting process, the fact that we'll probably be in a higher rate structure during those months that we will have to go into the grid and purchase electricity. I mean, I feel that there are many areas where, as a resident trying to do what's best for the environment, that we will end up being penalized at every corner. And my hope is that, tonight we're having this great discussion, that we think about that infrastructure to make it easier for a citizen that does want to do what's right for the environment, that's saying, okay, it's not going to be the most cost effective, but it is the right thing to do. And if we can do it, we want to make the choice to get rid of our stove, our gas burning stove. We want to get rid of our gas water heater and heating and cooling. We want to switch to electricity. I don't feel like we should be penalized because of that. I don't think everyone's ready to do it yet. But if one person, a second person, 10 people, 50 people start doing it, it'll be a topic of conversation that can switch the way we think about the way our homes can be comfortable without leaving a huge carbon footprint. So I hope this discussion continues, but I wanted to, the one last thing I want to say is, because, like you mentioned, Commissioner Foster, we are Palo Alto. It is small, and I do feel like a lot of the country does look to see what Palo Alto does. The fact that we're carbon neutral is huge, and people talk about it all the time. Why not put in some mandates that are kind of cutting edge, whether new construction should be all electric or not? But we do have an opportunity to set a new standard, because I do think the way of the future is electrification. And one of the things that wasn't addressed is the changes in storage technology are huge. And I think it's just going to progress, and that'll change the way the grid works in this country. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for those comments.
So I just want to say something. So I think it's wonderful that you're doing what you're doing and that you feel that this is a choice, and I would love to see the rules make it easy for this woman to be able to do that. But I think to take away the choice from someone else who is an educated person who's making a different choice is not a good thing for us to be doing. And so to make it easier for you to do what you're trying to do, I think is fabulous. Today I was on a call with Pete Capper's who's from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and they just did a big study on sort of looking at all the smart grid projects and the consumer behavior studies. And one of the things that we talked about on this call was the issue of when people can choose the approach that they want to take, then they are much more likely to make it successful. And the right approach is not the same for every single person. And I think it is not helpful to suggest that someone who doesn't want to choose an all-electric house is somehow wanting to abuse the environment. I think there's more than one way to do this in a respectful and responsible way in terms of trying to be a good steward of the earth, and we should recognize that there's not just one path, and that I would like to see her path be easier, and I would like some people who make a different choice to also have a good path.
Hang tight and chat with us after or come up after the next item. One thing I'd say, sort of a note to leave this on, in my personal opinion, there is a lot to be gained to the extent Palo Alto can go carbon neutral. That's not just the electric supply, overall. It's an enormous challenge because it's natural gas, it's transportation, and so on and so forth. But it's a great objective and one to pursue, and there's a lot to be gained by pursuing it. I'm also all in favor of leaving people with options to heat their houses with electricity, natural gas, firewood, what? Peat moss, yes, and so on and so forth. But there are consequences of that. And so I do think one thing to think about is, okay, to the extent people continue to use natural gas, what do we do about the greenhouse gas emissions? So it does circle back to, in my mind, to the greenhouse gas emissions, and I think we're not going to resolve it tonight, but it's something to think about. Now with that, since Director Fong is looking at the clock, at least in her mind, let's move on to item 2, but as we do so, Amy, are you sticking around or are you heading out? Because I have a comment on the redirection of the community solar program efforts that you should stick around for.
Can you you can also do it late.
Well, I can do it later under Commissioner comments.
Yeah, so it's
But is
fine. I
she
mean,
gonna-
I don't think she wants to engage with you on it, so we can certainly make sure she gets the message, and then if you wanted to
You know
engage
something,
further.
hold on a second. I'm going to spend 60 seconds, I'm going to say it right now. Just hang tight, Val, it's okay. I'm going to move up the commissioner comments and then anyone else can say it. First of all, thank you for the memo on it. Here's my takeaway. You wrote in this memo that the utility department is going to look at a redesign program that may not be fully turnkey. Here's the key point. I personally believe, and we can eventually, when it comes back to us for action, can say it more officially, that it is very important that we come up with a community solar program in this city. I'm disappointed that the one we were working towards fell apart. That's life, it happens. So I'm very supportive. I gather you're participating in this DOE effort, and I think that's fabulous. So my point is, let's make it happen by hook or by crook somehow. Thank you. Okay, item 2. And we welcome our city's Chief Sustainability Officer, Gil Friend. Gil, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Commissioner Foster, and good evening, Commissioners. Glad to be with you tonight to talk more broadly about fuel switching and electrification strategies. Can we get the slides switched? Do I do that? Okay, give me a second here. I can't. Okay. Very good. That thing there. Great, okay. So Commissioner Foster, I didn't comment in the previous dialogue because I wanted to step into a larger context. You saw Dr. Bailey's analysis, very specific technical and economic analysis of some specific electrification technologies. This is about now evaluation of an endeavor called for by City Council to look at overall fuel switching strategies and the wide array of tools that we might have in our toolkit to pursue that. We'll be coming back to you probably in about 2 months with a larger context yet, which is the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan that is looking, Commissioner, at exactly those questions of how could we be and how could we be a carbon neutral city, which will include many of the themes that you've raised today. Certainly the comprehensive approach, the holistic approaches that Director Fong referred to. Moving beyond sort of either-or thinking. It's not electrification or efficiency. It's electrification and efficiency and a number of other things, and price signals. It's not just a question of mandates. It might be a question of performance standards that provide a pressure into the market, but give individual actors the freedom to determine how they will meet that. So there is, we do compel certain things as a society. Where it's appropriate to do that, but we also want to give, not just for political reasons, but for really effectiveness reasons, to give the creativity free bound about how we go there. So with that as a preface, and we'll get into more of this both tonight and in a couple of months. Back in December, the City Council, through a colleague's memo, directed staff to report on resources and timeframes to evaluate 4 fuel switching strategies. You have these in the memo before you. I'm not going to read what's on the slide, but it's attempting to take a more comprehensive approach to this question, looking at technology and policy and economic issues. And then in February, staff brought to council, and council approved a 2-phase work plan. Responsive to the colleague's memo, the first phase is what we're talking about tonight, which is a work plan to evaluate, explore and evaluate a range of strategies that could accomplish these goals. Then the second phase would be to do the actual analyses if that is approved by council. What you've seen tonight from Dr. Bailey is one example of that more rigorous analysis, but we're not going into others of those tonight. What we would like to do tonight is discuss the proposed work plan with you that evaluates the options and establishes our best estimate of the level of effort that would be required to do those analyses, answer your questions, hear your suggestions, and then request your recommendation to refer this to the council for their approval, hopefully at the first or second session when they're back from summer vacation in August. Also, by way of context, this is staff's estimate of the breakdown of natural gas use in the city. It's an estimate because we don't have specific micro-use data on every usage, but we're doing, Shiva and others have done some clever analysis to try to get us at a fairly good breakdown. You see the distribution both in terms of functionality and the division between residential and commercial loads. That's the context that we're operating in here. Space heating and water heating are the big dogs. Commercial cooking is next and is a bit of a different beast to go after. But let me dive right in on that. We've proposed a work plan that contains 10 different initiatives. They're summarized here. They're detailed in the report that you have. You see that heat pump technology figures in importantly. Resources to encourage homeowners, several items that look at rate structures and the incentives and drivers that those can provide. Connection fees and permitting fees, electric vehicles, a substantial effort looking at code changes for both residential and commercial that could address these issues. As you probably know, we're beginning a new code cycle effort in August led by Development Services Department, aimed at, I believe, the January 2017 code upgrade. So we're in a continual process of examining and ratcheting up these codes. And then an effort that will look at financing strategies. You, in your prior discussion, mentioned several of them. There will be others that we're looking at there. And then looking at options for district heating possibilities, inspired perhaps by what Stanford has done with their HVAC plant in recent years. Let me also say that this is and this is also to a point that several of you raised, this is a joint effort, Utilities, Development Services, Office of Sustainability, Transportation in the Planning Department, Public Works, the ASD, Administrative and Services Division, where our financial and of course, the city attorney has reviewed all this and will continue to review throughout, and the city manager's support behind this. Let me just say, since Director Fong mentioned the city attorney, is that everything that we're going to present to you today and bring to you in the future will be subject to legal review by the city attorney to ensure that it's compliant with the applicable regulations and constraints that govern our activities.
Could I just ask you to
please
elaborate a little bit on one of the things you just said? Because to my recollection, this is the first time we've received a staff recommendation for action not presented by utilities staff. And so maybe I'm wrong, and I'm glad we're one city with multiple departments working together. But I was just wondering if we could hear a little bit more about the fact that we're hearing a proposal from multiple departments, a presentation from the Chief Sustainability Officer who doesn't report to the Director of Utilities, and how that all works.
I'm going to actually chime in on that a little bit. The Office of, whatever your office is called, Chief Sustainability Officer.
Office of Sustainability in the City Manager's office.
Is, of course, a new office in this city. There is no specific city commission that it works with. And so I also noted that, and I actually took it very positively because it does seem like a very logical thing. But in any event, feel free to comment further.
Can I just say, I think you're going to hear next month from the Chief Information Officer, Jonathan Meikenthal, on our fiber issues. You'll also hear from the Public Works Department on our recycled water. I can't remember if both of those are going to be action items. They may be, but so this is not going to be, this is not so unusual, this, what you're seeing now, because the items that we happen to work on cross-departmentally, some of that does fall under the UAC's purview. You will see it coming to you.
And I'll chime in and say I think that's very positive, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's all good. Were you going to comment?
No, I think Commissioner Foster and Director Fong have answered it well.
Right. So thanks to everyone for those comments. We can assume here on the commission that if something's being presented like this, that it does have the Utilities Department support?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is what I'm reporting here, but I'm reporting on a joint effort that involved people from multiple departments with careful back and forth and vetting along the way. So yes, this is a unified proposal to you.
I do appreciate the question, though.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and as we move into the climate action plan work, so much of this work touches on multiple departments and multiple aspects of city life that it's necessarily going to have to be joint efforts for many of these things. As you'll see from the work plan, a lot of the work for this initiative will live in utilities. Some of it will live in development services. Some of it will live in my office, and all through those efforts we'll coordinate, because the net result has to be additive and synergistic for it to work well. These are the areas that we propose to explore. We've put together the work plan that we think it will take to explore this. Here you see line by line for each of those major items, both the head count and the timing for these efforts, and on the right, the cumulative staff time and the consulting expenses anticipated. Most of these are already budgeted. Items 4 and 10 are not, and with your approval tonight and with the council's approval in August, we would propose to bring a budget amendment ordinance back to council to fund those specific items if they chose to go forward with them. And with that, we'd love to hear your questions and your thoughts. And I'm prepared, happy to bring up detail of each measure if you'd like to get into those.
Commissioner Schwartz, you look like you want to lead us off.
So I think it's great that you have this really comprehensive approach here. I think it's wonderful, and I am delighted to see the utility is working with the Chief Sustainability Officer. I think that's wonderful. What my question is it seems like there are some boundaries that narrow things here that I don't understand why they're there. So I see, time of use rate to promote lower cost EV charging at night. Obviously, if you're going to have that in place, then you have to have an endpoint device that you can use to sort of have an interval meter. Why are we not making interval meters available to other people who may not have EVs who want to be part of this process? So it seems to me that it's unnecessarily bounding it by saying only electric vehicle owners would be affected by this. So I guess why isn't the larger sort of a smart grid discussion part of this?
We may have been inelegant in how we phrase this. The intent isn't to limit that to EV owners, it's to use that as an example of the value of introducing time of use meters. As you know, there's an effort underway in utilities to look more broadly at a rollout of advanced metering across the city. So this is looking at the impact that would have on the load, some of the load factors that you were talking about before.
Right, okay, so it's not as narrow as it just that phrasing?
No.
Okay. And then the other sort of question I have is, it's like what's the lead? It's interesting to me that the label that got put on the whole thing was on fuel switching and electrification. It seems to me that what you've got here is a much broader and more subtle way of looking at things, and so I'm just, which I heartily support, but I just sort of don't understand why the title is fuel switching and electrification.
This work effort is in response to a colleague's memo from the City Council that was framed around that issue. It's in the context of a broader effort that we're undertaking to build a sustainability and climate action plan, which among other things is asking the question, could we be a carbon neutral city? What would it take to do that? How quickly could we do that? What choices do we want to make within those options? So from my perspective, the fuel switching and electrification effort is one of the elements in that initiative, which, as a number of you pointed out, will include a major focus on transportation, which is more than double the carbon footprint of all of our natural gas use and is critical to any future carbon strategy. So you'll see in that plan a very broad and integrative approach, and one that will, you may find provocative and challenging. I'm sure it'll generate more heat than we did tonight, but that's to the good. We want to provide something that will support a really grounded and effective conversation in the community. This effort is specifically in response to a specific council directive to address fuel switching and electrification. So it's not meant to be narrow or exclusive, but to be responsive to that request.
I would like to thank you for coming, and I appreciate that you're taking a broad approach on this, as you said, a holistic approach. I point out that this is an action item, and that the action is basically centered on the slide before this one. It is to give our recommendation on what the City Council should see, and that the fact that this is what they propose to explore. So I think it's key to point out that this is not necessarily an action on our part to recommend a bunch of actions that are things that need to be done right away. Back to both Commissioner Schwartz and Commissioner Eglash's comments about flexibility, I think we still retain quite a bit of flexibility. Obviously, we are, through the title of the slideshow, through the title of the colleagues' memo, there are certain momentum that's built in a certain direction, and certainly as there's a mindset that we're sort of endorsing, but really we are we would be endorsing this proposal to explore these important things. So I think that I'm not trying to stifle debate. I'm just trying to point out that as much as we want to discuss it, we are talking. We're not setting an inflexible path to the future. I do think that what I'd like to have make sure that to the City of Palo Alto staff and to you, Gil, is that that we do take to heart the important points that Commissioner Eglash and Commissioner Schwartz have made about the importance of flexibility and the importance of choice within the framework of trying to reduce greenhouse gases and to fight climate change. We do want to make sure that the important opinion, and the people to have choices is, I want that. I wish I could add, I wish I could be really creative like Commissioner Foster would be about coming up with some line to add to this staff recommendation. But short of that, I would just say that the point of flexibility and choice is really important.
But a portfolio of options.
And a portfolio of options.
I agree, and I think it's not stated as a specific line item for research because it's part of the context of the whole approach. Flexibility, cost effectiveness is an existing commitment, both mandated and an expectation of staff. you know, my personal feeling is that I'm not very interested in sustainability at the expense of quality of life or convenience or things that people care about, but in a way that enhances that. And so that's what we're trying to do in everything we look at. You know, if you want to add specific language, that would be fine. I think it's more of a context to the whole body of work.
Great. That's sufficient enough for me. Okay. And then I would say to our friend who came and spoke from the public, you know, it is important to make sure that when people do want to exercise their choice in the way that they believe will help the environment, that the city is supportive of that rather than sort of, you know, the natural bureaucracy that you know comes from 100 years of operating a city doesn't stifle that sort of choice and creativity.
I'd just like to point out that the code change that was mentioned earlier, I think is a state code. So it wasn't.
Okay, so I just want to, regardless of that, Director Fong, I want to make the point that the city wants to encourage.
But we weren't being we weren't being purposeful.
The one thing
if I could just add here, the point is noted, and I will share both your comments and the residents' comments with Peter Pernijot, who's our Development Services Director. He's not able to be here tonight because of a personal matter. But you know, as you'll remember, this is the department that drastically reduced the time for PV permitting, and is one example of a commitment that they're showing to very much to respond to that concern. If you see places where we are making things more difficult for citizens, we'd like to hear about it so we can fix it.
So last 2 points. One is pretty small, but on item number 7, where on the next slide where it talked about, Commissioner Schwartz brought it up, where it said time of use rate to promote lower cost EV charging at night. I'll just point out that the time of use rates, first of all, haven't been set for the city, but they also would be evolving over time in that we may say now that we would encourage people to charge at night, but we may have a time where, referring back to the discussion about the duck curve, there may be an overproduction of electricity during the cool spring days, cool sunny spring days where we want people to actually charge during the day. And so I just, we want to get away from, again, being too proscriptive, and also to recognize the fact that the world is changing. And then my final point is, I would actually go to, on item number 7 under the staff proposal, to the, again, time of use electrical rate options, just taking out for residential EV charging, or putting in, for example, for residential EV charging, to get to Commissioner Schwartz's comment that of course we want the time of use electrical rate options really to be a tool to reduce greenhouse gases, not necessarily for one particular way of reducing greenhouse gases. So that's the entirety of my comments, and thank you again.
Great, thank you very much.
And I think that a big part of this, and one of the things that is going to be a particular issue for Palo Alto that might not be the same for other communities, is that we have a lot of people coming into the city during the day who are not residents, and who are going to want to charge their cars while they're at work. And to the extent that we can do solar canopies on office buildings where, people are charging their cars in that kind of way, might be something that's really effective for us that other places don't have to think of as much, because the concentration of who's coming in, I think I was really struck by when the staff did this really wonderful Utility 101 for the new commissioners. When I saw the difference in the electric usage for commercial versus residential, it really brought home how much of our electric use is driven by people who don't live here. And so we have to be creative in how we do those things. And so I think I'm really excited about what you're approaching here. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Iglesias, I was inclined to think that you should go last, because after your eloquent comments last time, none of us would want to actually have to follow you, but we'll take our chances here.
My comments are much briefer, Mr. Foster. Thanks to all the authors and presenters for a great set of recommendations, and I think the recommendations are terrific, and I support them. I was also really impressed to see in the staffing recommendations that it looks like to a large degree we're doing what I would call zero-sum staffing. It looks like to a large degree we're managing to staff this by finding things we're currently doing that we're willing to terminate or that have ended naturally, and that those are the human resources that we're using for a lot of these tasks. And to the degree that that's in fact what we're doing, I think that's just absolutely fabulous. If we can take on a major new initiative like sustainability across the city and not have it contribute to an ever larger and more bloated city budget, then we've not only done something good for the environment, but for all the citizens and businesses in the city. And so I just wanted to comment on that. But I think it's a great set of recommendations.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, one general question. We're carbon neutral electricity, but that's because we buy offsets for what we get. We're never going to be 100% renewable energy for our electricity, or not in the near term, nor are we for gas. No, we aren't, because we buy offsets for gas.
So in 2017, we'll be 50% hydro under an average hydro year, which we don't have this year, and we'll be 50% renewable. We will be 100% carbon neutral with no offsets, or no renewable energy certificates.
And we'll never have to buy unspecified power off the grid?
On an annual basis, we will be 100% carbon neutral using our hydro and our renewables. Now, on an hourly basis or on a minute-by-minute basis, we may or may not be, but on an average, over the annual, over the year.
Which goes back to that point that on a minute-by-minute basis, we may be buying brown power off the grid, but we're distributing an equal amount back to the grid at some other minute. Is that correct? Okay.
Well, that's terrific, and of course, depending on the rain, and the snow, but yes. So we can also buy offsets for gas use on that. In some cases, that may be more cost-effective than paying $10,000 to retrofit a home. I don't know. But I don't know if that's factored into our thinking on this.
Well, in task number 9, where we're looking at financing strategies, we would consider questions like offsetting natural gas, carbon taxes, other financing mechanisms that could provide both resources and incentives to that. So the conversation is wide open around that. We're in several levels of transition at the same time. For the city of Palo Alto, we established the offset strategy as a bridge to the 2017 goal that Director Fong spoke about, to get us carbon neutral with offsets quickly, and then carbon neutral, what I think of as natively, by 2017. As a state, we're in a transition, and in that transition, yeah, we're using some dirtier grid resources, but electrons are fungible. And so on an annual basis, this thing balances out on any given moment. Yes, we're relying on what's there as the state moves as rapidly as it can into a transition toward a 50% renewable and hopefully beyond society. So I think we need to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good here, and drive what is a really striking program. Part of my job is to be an ambassador for the city to other organizations, and I'll tell you, people are just blown away at what's being done here. So, to Commissioner Foster's point, we're a tiny little drop in the bucket, but people watch us. And if we can do proof of concept here that other people can copy or adapt or learn from or improve upon, then I think we've made a great contribution.
Oh, I agree completely, and doing it affordably makes it a more important example for others.
It's essential that we do that because it won't scale without that. We have certain luxuries in this community that other communities don't have. The future has to be economically viable or it doesn't go.
So I fully support what CSO friend just said. I would say to you, I guess there's a big question about, I'm just sitting here trying to get my mind around your question, and I keep thinking, so who's paying and who's benefiting, and we have to consider that.
Absolutely. I agree on that. Just a smaller point. This is probably going on elsewhere in the city, but some gasoline use is affected by traffic light patterns and waiting long times at lights when no cars are coming, and smart lights reduce gasoline usage. I don't know if that comes under what department or when those things are considered.
It would come under the transportation department.
Okay.
You're talking to the right guy.
Oh, good.
He'll help incorporate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. As I understand it, natural gas is one of the two remaining, or the two largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Palo Alto. Is that correct? The other one being transportation fuels?
Road travel is about 61% of our remaining footprint. Natural gas is about 25% of our remaining footprint. 80 some odd to 90%, as Dr. Bailey estimated before. So if we want to think about 80% reduction by 2050, the state goal, or sooner, perhaps we might accept it. Clearly, that road goes through both of those
right
bubbles.
And in your opinion,
yeah,
does electrification, again defined as people replacing, let's ignore cars for a moment, just talk about appliances and households and the like, does people replacing natural gas appliances with electric appliances help, from your perspective, in the grand scheme of things, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
In the grand scheme of things, I think it does emphasis on grand. I think the combination of electrification and efficiency are going to be critical elements there. I think the point that Commissioner Eglish raised before about the short-term demand implications, frankly, is something I had not thought about before, so I'd like to look further at what you've got there. But then we've got to balance the immediate scheme of things and the grand scheme of things and understand what makes sense within that. So this is something that we need to include in the analyses as we go forward.
Sounds good. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
I move that we approve.
We forgot about public comment. That's terrible. Bruce, you want to go first? Well.
On this, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry Amy Bailey has left. I think that the staff has done an incredible...
Nope, over there.
I thought the staff has done an amazing job on both of these things, and I strongly urge you to do just what Jim was suggested, to recommend that the council adopt the work plan.
Bruce, do you have a comment?
Thank you, commissioners. This has been a long time in coming, this moment. Our group actually wrote a draft colleagues memo for the city council members more than a year ago. It took us 6 months to get that colleagues memo approved by the city council, and it's been another 6 months of staff time to get to this point. So we've tried to be as patient as we can. In general, I guess I would say that these policy initiatives are, and I wanted to thank Amy and the staff and Gil, and also for the accessibility that all of the staff has provided to us. So I definitely appreciate that. So I believe that the proposed initiatives are reasonable, but I believe that they're generally somewhat timid in nature. There's a certain lack in the EV initiatives. Some examples of things that could be included are joining the DOE Workplace EV Charging Initiative or Challenge, to update and expand the city's EV website, to actively participate in the CEC and ARB EV-related regulatory activities, and to become a larger and more active participant in ride and drive events, such as the event which is sponsored by Charge Across Town, which is coming up in October. I wanted to touch upon the TOU briefly. These new devices that we're talking about, both EVs and the heat pump water heaters, have the potential capability to be grid interactive devices. And that sort of, to some degree, leapfrogs TOU, because if they are grid interactive devices, then they're really under utility control. So I think that's something that should be considered. I hope that this is a provisional list that gets fine-tuned, at least on an annual basis, if not on a more frequent basis. One of the things that we've seen is lots of analysis and less implementation. It would be nice if we could figure out some parallel paths for both parallel implementation and analysis. We certainly understand that analysis is necessary. I also wanted to highlight that we believe that the state goals, the 80% reduction by 2050, are insufficient given the situation that we're in. They really reflect the science that was 10 years ago. They do not reflect current science. So I believe that we need to shoot for goals that are more aggressive than the state mandated goals. And that raises challenges in itself, obviously. One of the things I also noted is that there's no explicit timelines in any of these initiatives, and so I'd like to see those timelines, and I'd like to see estimates of the emissions reductions, paralleling Judith's suggestion. I know it's hard to make estimates, but just ballpark estimates and timelines for each of those would be helpful. I just wanted to harp on the end-of-life replacement idea again. That is a metric that we really ought to be paying attention to. If we can't effectively replace these devices at end of life, and we have a poor replacement rate with more gas-fired, water heaters, then we're not going to make very good progress. And that holds for both water heaters, HVAC systems, cars, everything. And it's also a natural point in the lifetime to do a switch. Otherwise, you've got a system that's got an embedded cost, an embedded capital cost that people are not going to want to throw away. Let's see. We'd like to also take a look at accelerating the efforts for financing what you could call amperage upgrades. In other words, making sure that all houses have 200 amp panels at the residential level and similar modifications made at the commercial level. Just work to get ready for this coming change in infrastructure. And lastly, I just wanted to say that, that for the UAC, this electrification is, we believe, a very excellent strategy for climate reduction. I've been studying this problem and others for many years now. I think that electrification, we're a little bit ahead of the curve, but electrification has been presented as a solution by many different bodies. I think it's a very good course. And it's really probably one of the most important issues that the UAC is facing today. And certainly for the next decade. This is not going to go away. We're going to continue to grapple with these issues. And I'd like to urge the UAC to take a more proactive role in all of this instead of a reactive role. As commissioners, I think that you could be tremendously helpful by taking a more proactive role in making all this, understanding what the trade-offs are and contributing towards these solutions. And it's obviously a very tough problem. So I'll end with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have commissioners from 2 commissioners, so go ahead, Commissioner Eglash, and you're up next.
I wanted to thank Bill and Bruce and Walt for their tremendous contributions tonight and on an ongoing basis. I saw our Chief Sustainability Officer rapidly taking notes, catching everything that you said, and we're all paying attention and listening. Beyond that, the entire city, including our Chief Sustainability Officer, are committed and dedicated to getting all kinds of citizen input throughout all phases of this process.
Commissioner Denner.
Thank you also for the comments. I had not paid attention to the timeline. I was looking more at the budget. And realize that we're looking at dedicating essentially slightly more than half one person full-time to this, and that these, for the most part, would be concluded by the end of next year. So the question would be for Gil and Val and the staff is there a way to complete this more quickly with perhaps a little more resources dedicated? And maybe some of the tasks and not others. I understand that's a budget issue and that's within the city council's control, not ours, but it'll be that question.
Okay, hold on just one sec. Ms. Kelty, did you want to make a comment, or are you set? I think. You're good? Okay. All right, now you were going to, wait, motion or comment?
Motion.
Go for it.
I move that we approve the staff recommendation with one change, that in item number 7, after the word options, we add the 2 words "for example."
I second that motion.
Holy smokes, I gotta go look at this. Wait, I'm sorry. Can you,
I'm sorry, Chair, if you can't keep up with us.
I'm a little slow. You know, the meeting's dragged on a little while and it's getting late.
So I'm moving that we approve the staff recommendation on item number 7, after the phrase "electric rate options," put the words "for example," comma.
Okay, works for me. Does staff any comment on that before we vote, or have a second, I should say?
To be fair to the
Actually,
staff.
hold on a second. In the absence of the city attorney, I'll say we do need a second, and you seconded. Okay, now we can have comment. So,
Staff's looking forward to your vote.
okay, Gil, you fine with that? Mike, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, to answer the question, follow up on the comment I just made, what is the feasibility of accelerating
So
some
can
of
I
this?
just say, we're not able to go with this item to council until mid-August, because that is when they return from break. And then we're going to have to, in the meantime, we'll be organizing ourselves, assuming the council is going to approve. So, you know, we're going to move as fast as we can, but that's what I'll say. We'll move as fast as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. All
Aye.
all opposed? No, passes unanimously. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right,
And let me just give you a preview.
sure.
Summary of some of the key themes and a link to the bottom to let us have your opinions early.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful.
I think I just gave you one. If I gave you more than one, forgive me. And I'll take one. Okay. We've got a few we have a few extras right there, which, wait, Gil. Hang on. Jane, can I give these to you? Actually, here.
What is it? Hey, Jim, are you there?
We'll leave one here. Okay. Okay, next up is selection of potential I'm sorry, whoops, I'm mistaken. Update on spring 2015 request for proposal for renewable energy projects.
What are we doing with the speakerphone?
I have no idea. But I would,
What are we doing with the speakerphone?
my guess is it's our,
I'll let you know. Hi, Jane Ratchey, Assistant Director of Utilities, and unfortunately you have me here in person giving this presentation instead of Jim Stack, who really knows what he's talking about, but he is on the phone in case he's needed, and I'm sure he will be to answer questions, but I'll be delivering the actual presentation. So we did release a new request for proposal for renewable energy projects this spring, and this presentation is just to give you a preview of what you'll be seeing and to show you sort of the preliminary results of our evaluation of the responses to the RFP. How does this work?
Sideways. Do the sideways keys. Yeah, just, if you do these keys, Jim.
Oh, sideways, okay. All right, so we'll head right into it. This graphic shows you what our electric portfolio we expect looks like in 2022. And you'll notice that some market power is creeping back into the portfolio. We believe we'll be pretty much 100% carbon free, not carbon neutral, starting at the end of 2016. But then after 2021, one of our early renewable contracts, one of our wind contracts expires, and so we're sort of falling off the cliff there. So this is what the portfolio will look like in 2022 if we don't do anything right now, and if all of the solar contracts that we have signed, actually those projects get built and get part of our portfolio. This is another view, the view that we've often shown with our renewable energy supplies, that shows we've got the green is the wind, and you see those expiring starting in 2021. The brown color there is the landfill gas to energy projects, and then we have the orange is all the 5 solar contracts that we have, and one will be coming online this month, the first one. So you see that in order to be carbon neutral, which is really 100% of our load being either some sort of renewable contracts or renewable energy certificates and hydro, that's the line is shown on this chart. So given that cliff that we see in 2021, we released this RFP, which you might think, why are you looking for more renewables now? Don't you have enough? In fact, we have an RPS starting at the end of 2026 of about 57% if all these contracts, projects come to fruition. But right now, renewable energy prices are quite low, as you'll see. They're even lower than we've seen before. And we also know that the investment tax credit will expire, or not expire, be dramatically reduced at the end of 2016. It'll go from 30% to 10%. And we also feel like the 50% is pretty much clear that the 50% RPS mandate is coming very soon. And so we know we have to be at 50%. We also don't know if a particular 3 of the solar projects, we're hoping all 5 of them come online. 2 or one's coming very shortly and one's coming fairly soon after that, but the other 3 still have some milestones to reach before they come online. So we can't be certain that they'll come online. And we also know that some years are dry. And so this is the reason we believe that we have a need for more renewable energy and why we issued the RFP. So this is what we asked for in the RFP. We asked for 30 to 80 gigawatt hours. That's about 3 to 8% of our total needs. And we wanted the energy to be delivered starting in 2021. And so this could be a little bit odd, and we don't know if someone's going to build it and sell the first 5 years of production to somebody else or what they're going to do, but we wanted a long-term contract starting in 2021 when we need it.
Let's go question. Why isn't demand response part of the portfolio? Is that, do you look at it for someplace else, or do you just not look at demand response as a possible resource?
We do have a demand response program.
Oh, okay, so but it just doesn't, it's not big enough to show up in here?
No, this was a request for proposals for renewable energy projects.
Okay.
So in other words, different slice of the apple.
Right.
2 different programs.
So we got 40 projects that responded to this. The vast majority, 32 of the 40, were solar projects. We got 5 wind projects, 2 biomass, 1 geothermal, and 1 ocean wave project. And we evaluate these the way we always do. We look at price and value. So we look at the shape of the generation for the project, what value that has, avoided transmission, any other assets, if there's local capacity, any other values for the different product, and we compare that to the market price of energy to calculate the green premium, and you've seen this before on every renewable project we've signed. And we also look at project viability. How close is this? Do they have site control? Have they done this before? What stage is this project in? Does it look like it's actually going to get built? We've been burned, as you know, a number of times. So that's a key thing. So here, this graph shows the results of what we got. So I said we had, this shows sort of the range of the responses that we got for each technology and the median. And of course, for ocean, wave, and geothermal, there's only one proposal, so that is the price and the median. We had 2 biomass projects. You can see that this is what's shown here is the green premium, so that's the amount above market brown power price that you pay to get this renewable energy. And then you see at the right, the 5 wind projects had a green premium of somewhere under $20 per megawatt hour up to almost $40. And then you see a gigantic range on the solar projects proposed from being cheaper than market to being much more expensive than market. So this just shows you the range of all the 40 that we received, but the prices are quite a bit lower than we've seen in the last couple of RFP responses. This kind of shows you over time all the different projects that we've signed, all the different contracts we've executed. So you can see the early ones were right around $60 a megawatt hour. That was for the wind contracts and the early landfill gas ones. And then you see some very high cost ones. Those are the landfill gas to energy projects. And then we started getting the price of solar fell into being the cheapest resource. And you can see the red bar there shows the range of green premiums for the 10 lowest cost proposals received in our 2011 RFP. You can see the range in the 2012 RFP, the 2013, and now this 2015 range of the 10 best proposals. So it's just gone down, down, down. And you'll see the blue diamonds are the ones that we actually executed. So this sort of shows you that this is the prices we're looking at now. We're looking at pretty good prices. And I think that's about it. So this shows for the amount we're looking for, what this little stair step or whatever you want to call this graph that we always show will look like when we get one of these projects online. And so it'll make us be carbon free out for a long time in the future. So from here, we are currently interviewing the top 10 proposers and talking to them and finding out and trying to evaluate which one we want to select. We're hoping to select one and negotiate with a PPA with the finalist and come back to you with a contract, hopefully by October, your October meeting, and then hopefully go all the way to the council and get execution of a new PPA by the end of this year. So that's just our timeline. And that's it.
Thanks very much. A quick question on my part. We care about price. We care about certainty of happening, or whatever term you use. No, what's viability? Thank you. What other factors do we take into account? For example, diversity of supply. Is that a factor? In other words, adding components that we don't have at all or don't have much of. Is that a factor or not?
I'll let Jim answer that question. Jim, do you hear that?
Jim, you're on the mic.
And did you hear my question?
The question about whether we're more concerned about price versus viability for these projects.
And are there other factors like diversity or fit in the portfolio, or what are other factors?
Specifically diversity, in other words, adding sources we don't have much of or any of. Is that a pro or a con?
Jim, did you hear that, the question?
Yeah, so about diversity of the portfolio, is that the question?
Yes. Yes, would you consider that a pro or a con? Perhaps Jane can.
Yeah, we would consider diversity of different types of resources a pro. In our evaluation, we did try to factor in sort of a cost of integrating different kinds of resources into the grid. So, you know, intermittent resources like solar and wind, we currently don't experience any direct costs associated with those, but there is the potential in the future we could be charged additional fees by the ISO, you know, just direct fees or higher ancillary services costs for having those resources in a portfolio. So we did factor that into the evaluation when we were comparing the different proposals we got.
Got it. Okay. Steve?
Thanks so much for launching this. This is yet another example of just a great thing that Palo Alto does, looking several years ahead and taking prudent steps now. So thanks so much for doing this. I guess I have two concerns. One is the one that we were just talking about. Are you at all concerned that in the time frame we're talking about here, in the sort of period 2020 to 2030 and beyond, that solar might become less valuable if the state is installing so much solar that we can no longer use it? And should we be somehow evaluating these options in a way that puts dispatchable sources as more valuable than PV?
I'll let Jim take a stab at that first, but I believe that, you know, in this time frame, we're going to see storage become a player in this market. The price is going to fall, and that's going to help, and there's going to be a lot of issues. There's going to be issues like that addressed. There is I think what Jim was referring to too is the likelihood that we're already seeing that the ISO is going to require us to acquire flexible capacity resources to back intermittent resources like solar and wind. And so we expect some sort of cost with that. But Jim, did you have any additional comments?
Sorry, I couldn't hear everything you just said, Jane.
Did you hear Commissioner Eglash's question about, are we worried that solar is going to be, because of the duck curve, let's say, just dumped because we have excess generation that we can't use?
Yeah, I did hear Commissioner Eglash's question. And I guess my response to that would be that doing the RFP at this point in time, you know, when we compared solar versus the other resources, the cost of solar is so much lower than the other resources that at this point in time anyway, at the proposals we were receiving, even if you factored in quite a significant reduction in the value of the solar energy, it still, you know, tends to be the top choice compared to other types of resources that we're seeing right now. You know, you could speculate that if we did an RFP in 5 years, the results might be a little bit different. Costs could come down or go up for different types of resources. So it's just kind of the risk you take doing an RFP now versus waiting until a contract expires to do an RFP in 5 years.
To add to what Jim was saying, we also in our contracts now have a optionality provision where we can cite storage at the PV site. We have a market view that the storage prices are going to come down and the capacity price for firming up is going to go up, at which point there will be a greater role for storage, 2020 plus timeline. At that timeline, at a cost to be determined, we have optionality to site storage at these locations. Even the prior contract you approved for PV had that optionality.
So I certainly didn't want to turn this into a debate, and I'm certainly not the expert here. All of you are. But I did want to follow up on what was just said. If storage becomes economically viable by the next decade, as it almost certainly will, and if storage becomes the path by which we can continue to install more and more PV in the state to satisfy more and more of our needs, then that presumably means PV will be penalized or taxed to pay for the storage. PV power will be less valuable than the same kilowatt hours coming from a dispatchable source, because you won't ask your dispatchable sources to bear the cost of the storage, you'll ask your PV to bear the cost of the storage.
Correct. And that we do consider, we do fully expect, as time goes by past 2020, to be curtailed, and as much as 5 to 10% over time. And we have factored that in our evaluation.
You are discounting either the production or penalizing the cost, right? It's the same thing. It's just two different ways to get to the same answer.
Correct.
But you are doing that for PV in this model.
Correct.
That's very impressive. That sounds great.
Yep.
I'm very pleased.
So there's two ways to do it: either discount it internally, or request to the contractor that you shall curtail up to a certain amount at no cost to us. We feel it's better for us to take on the burden and take on the cost of curtailment and pay a lower price now and then pay the curtailment cost, but that's factored in.
Very impressive. The other part of this that strikes me was one that Jane Ratchey mentioned, which is that we're talking about delivery beginning in 2021, and it just seems like that's got to hugely increase the risk to us that some of these projects won't come to fruition. There's just so many reasons why that could be the case. It could be that they're in an earlier stage of development, which I know is part of what you're weighing. It could be that people are making overly optimistic assumptions in their bids, figuring that if their assumptions turn out to be too optimistic, they'll just walk away and not deliver anything. I wonder if we ought to consider doing a very different kind of RFP and PPA now. I wonder if we ought to consider something that starts delivering electricity as soon as possible, and then we just sell that electricity, resell it. And that's a way of reducing the risk to the same low level that the risk would be at for all of our other recent RFPs and PPAs, where we wanted them to initiate as quickly as possible. And even though presumably we lose a little bit of money on every kilowatt hour that we resell, we've increased a great deal of certainty and viability compared to an RFP that says we're not going to take any power till 2021.
Right, so Jim and I are on the evaluation team, so yeah. Jim, would you like to answer that question, or do you want me to take that on?
Sure, I would respond that a significant number of the responses we received were for projects that were going to be built by the end of 2016. And then the developer of the project, the seller, would take on the risk of selling that energy into the grid or finding another off-taker to purchase that energy before 2021. So a good number of those projects are in the pipeline, pretty close to being shovel-ready at this point. So I'd say they are, on the lower end of the risk side. There were a few with plans to construct in 2020 or 2021. And those, of course, you're right, you're correct to say that they have a little bit higher risk, development risk associated with them. And for those projects, we requested a significantly higher amount of development assurance, which is sort of the collateral that we hold on to protect us from that risk that the project doesn't get built as planned.
Well, thank you for all of that. I guess I'm not sure that all of this discussion on either of the 2 points I raised, the disadvantages of PV and whether those disadvantages are adequately baked into the evaluation, and the disadvantages of something that's not going to start delivering power till 2021. I'm not sure how comforting any of this discussion should be to any of us on the UAC, because the next time we see this, you will have selected one finalist that you've negotiated with. You're going to be presenting a single PPA to us that we can either vote up or down on. And so none of us should imagine that the next time we see this, we're going to be able to comment on the pros and cons of dispatchable versus PV, or the pros and cons of something that's shovel-ready now versus something that's not going to be shovel-ready for several years. And so I guess to be clear, and I'm only speaking for myself, we haven't heard from the other commissioners. Speaking for myself, my comments are intended to communicate to you my feeling that earlier development and deployment of the renewable source is worth a lot to me, and the assurance that you've correctly baked in the possibility that PV kilowatt hours are going to be penalized in the next decade because of the need for concomitant storage, that you've adequately baked that in.
Okay, other?
How much in the evaluation of the RFPs do you take into account how financeable the projects are, and of the ones of the three that you sort of already have in the works, how much is financing playing a role in sort of the delays or barriers to having them come online?
Jim, did you hear that?
Yes. So we definitely take into account the financing abilities of these proposers when we evaluate them. We give significant weighting to the viability of the project, and a large chunk of that score is based on the availability of financing that the different developers have. Several of the ones that are on our short list right now that we're evaluating have the ability to finance themselves on balance sheet, finance their projects on balance sheet, which means there's very little financing risk of those. I think you asked a question about the three projects that are slated to come online next year, and I believe all three of those are going to be financed on balance sheet, so there's little financing risk associated with the ones that we have contracted in our pipeline.
Hey, thanks very much, Jim. Congratulations again on another successful RFP. I was curious how you're going to evaluate the viability of the Ocean Wave project, because it's a very exciting opportunity, and especially at that price, it seems amazing. But I don't know how much those have been built. So how do you evaluate the viability?
Jim, did you hear the question?
Yeah, I'm not, right now we're negotiating with these people, or we're discussing and interviewing these people, and I'm not sure how much detail we should get into a specific project. But just know that viability is one of our criteria for choosing the one that we will choose to negotiate a contract with.
A couple times in the presentation, Assistant Director Arachi mentioned viability and problems with previously contracted projects maybe not making it to the end. Have the criteria on slide 7 or criteria not listed on slide 7 changed to reflect these getting burned potentially, or other previous getting burned situations?
Jim?
Right. I would say we've increased the amount of weight we've applied to the viability criteria. We have tried to refine those that metric a little bit to the ability that we can. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I think we're trying to account for the experiences we've had with other developers, both in terms of our viability scoring as well as in our development assurance requirements.
Yeah, it just seems to me like the development assurance requirement is one of your best tools, so I just throw that out there. Thanks very much for the presentation.
Yeah, we've increased the development assurance over periods of time to reduce that.
So I'm going to add a comment that maybe goes the other way, because I agree completely with Commissioner Cook on the interest in the ocean wave one. Now, of course, I like the price point as well. Something tells me that, lowest price for an unknown technology is probably going to be very high risk. And it may not may not survive the analysis. But boy, I'd be willing to take on more risk there. And I don't know how you factor that in. I guess I'd say for a new technology that we have not used before, by definition, it's more risky. And if we say that viability is an increasingly important concern, it almost automatically kicks something like that out. And I don't have a solution for you at 9:30 at night on exactly, or whatever time it is, on exactly how to deal with that. But I would say, if we did a project like that and it ended up not happening, that's a bummer. But it's, in that case, better to have tried and not succeeded than not try at all.
So I'll just say, if I could just jump in, we appreciate those comments. I don't, we do a lot of these bid evaluations. I don't, Jim Stack does. Every factor is in there when you evaluate the bid. You just weight them in accordance with what you've learned. And so I don't know what the weighting factor is for viability, but just understand that every factor gets factored in, and it's just weighted in accordance with what becomes very important for the portfolio. Right. So we will bring to you after looking at everything and after and in fact, just to be clear, we might have decided we want to negotiate a contract with one party, and that could fall apart. And so, I mean, just to be clear, what we ultimately will bring to you will be based on our best judgment in evaluating the bid and in doing the negotiation.
So I guess my point is I would give points or something or other for novel.
So again, I think we have to predetermine that way in advance of ever receiving the bids.
Predetermine what?
The weighting factors. That is, you can't make it the rules up after you see the bids. So you do it before you open any of the bids. So that's already set. We can't tamper with that system. And I don't know what the weighting is, but I'll just say that was predetermined before we opened the bids. Otherwise, you're changing the rules as you move along, and that would be completely contrary to our
So in other words,
code.
your evaluation of a solar versus a wind versus a biomass is all done on exactly the same criteria?
We run it through the matrix, and we determine which ones we're going to negotiate with. And sometimes the negotiations work, and sometimes they don't, and we might have to go to a different project depending on where the negotiations are.
Shiva, you going to add something to that?
If I may add, yes, you're right. It's the same criteria. Technology viability and provenness is part of the viability.
So
criteria.
solar, or something that's very wind is going to beat the novel technologies every day of the week.
That's correct.
Right, and so if we had wanted to do something like you're saying, we would have had to have that as a criteria, like we want all kind of brands,
Okay, so
all kind of new stuff, and that we're going to weight by 25%. We would have had to have that in the RFP when
So
we went out,
your
and we
point
did
is,
not.
thanks for the comment, but too late.
For this one.
Okay.
Too late for this one.
Through our emerging technology program, we do.
Yes.
Exactly. I would just remind us all that this RFP is not about innovation. This RFP is about satisfying our city's electrical needs.
Yes.
And we can certainly decide to go do things where the goal is innovation, and we're willing to assume a lot more project risk. But I think for us to sit here and second guess staff's basis for doing this when they have the job of making sure they can reliably meet our electric needs, I have no problem with what they're doing.
So with respect to the emerging technology program, something tells me ocean wave renewable energy probably is not going to qualify, although I'd be happy to be told otherwise. Why don't we do the following? I would, to the extent you are suggesting anyone is second guessing, I would push back on that. I don't think so. But what I would say is the next time we do this, let's have a conversation on the criteria before the RFP goes out so that we can have a discussion on that. Okay?
And I would add to that, if I could, the concept of buying an RFP where you buy smaller pieces from multiple vendors, you're spreading the risk quite a bit. and if one of them doesn't perform, you're...
I'd like to remind everyone that these are contracts that we pay only when we get generation, and we pay only the amount of generation we get. So there's not a whole lot of risk in some sense that you may be talking
No,
of.
we understand that. Only the risk that they don't
And then
deliver.
Shiva said, you know, we've built up these performance deposits so that we get liquidated damages if they don't come online when they say they do. And so there's a lot of the risk in that respect has been mitigated. If the guy goes away, goes bankrupt or something, we're back where we started and we'll have to do new RFP. It's not like, oh my God, you know, we're going to be having a blackout or something.
That's a very important point, that you've all done excellent risk mitigation, so the risk is not as great as it could be. Okay, any other comments? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, next up is a selection of potential topics for discussion at a future UAC meeting. This is an opportunity to raise any topic at all, but it's also an opportunity to discuss our 5 favorite topics on that the City Council has asked us to look at in case we want to, or in case we are at any point ready to add anything to a future agenda for discussion purposes. Commissioner Schwartz and Danaher, you have a meeting with the city on FTTP next week, I believe. Commissioner Cook, anything on second connection and undergrounding that we need to comment on? We can also save it for commissioner comments, but in case,
Yeah, not yet. Commissioner Hall and I are going to meet this month.
Okay, sounds good.
Do we have to, like, say it now, get fiber on the premises? Do we have to say it now to get it on?
It's already on September for the calendar year.
So not strictly speaking, this is sort of an opportunity to, but we can still talk to Director Fong and do so. Director Fong, are we having a meeting in August? I'm sort of assuming all our meetings are hanging in there, right? We do periodically cancel August meetings, but I think this year we're having it.
Just to remind you, the August meeting is a pretty important one. We are
Recycled water.
bringing the recycled water environmental impact report to you.
Got it. Not to mention the program for emerging technologies update. Okay, let's move on then to discussion of or drought update.
Okay, this is our monthly update. It looks funny. This is, yeah. Just a couple of things have been happening by the State Board in the last month, and I just wanted to kind of go back in time a little bit with what the State Board's been doing with respect to curtailment notices on people that hold water rights. And if you recall, 1914 is a critical year in water rights, because that is when the State Water Resources Control Board was founded and when they began issuing water rights. So it has mostly been thought that if you have a water right that emanates prior to 1914, you're really beyond the reach of the State Board. So on April 23rd, the board took action to limit appropriative water rights on the San Joaquin and Scott River for the right holders that were not pre-14, so they were post-1914 water rights. They added more watersheds, the Sacramento River watershed in the Delta on May 1st, and they ordered some curtailments to what might be called junior water right holders, people who have water rights after 1914. But on June 12th, they went after some pre-14 rights back to 1903 on the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers and the Delta. And that was unique and pretty interesting, and got lots of legal action started. These were notices that they should stop diverting, but it wasn't an order. And then on June 26th, just last Friday, they went back even farther on the upper San Joaquin River. And at that point, they included the San Francisco's water right on the Tuolumne, and they said that we made a mistake. We should have included that in our June 12th order, which was sort of interesting. But again, this isn't or 12th notice, June 12th notice. So it's not an order yet. We're watching it closely. San Francisco's obviously watching this very closely. And this, they say, pertains to no additional diversions appropriative, and you're using your appropriative right, but all the water that you may have in some storage reservoir somewhere is in storage, and we're not going to take it out of there, but no further diversions is what they're talking about. So this is all very interesting, and don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but it's going to get interesting. This is the picture for the San Francisco's system since the beginning of this year. The red line is what water usage is for the whole system. And you can see it's the 2013 line is there. And so the usage is far, far below what it was in 2013, and certainly below what it was last year as well. And you see the dotted line that's starting on June 1st, that is the period when the 24% for us, the 25% statewide mandate period begins on June 1st, 2015. So we've just completed 1 month of use under that. And the regional system, San Francisco's regional system, the dotted line there is the sum of all the different agencies that San Francisco serves and what their goals should be. And so we're well below the goal. On the other hand, we also find that it's a lot easier to get water reductions in the summer months when irrigation is a big part than it is percentage-wise in the winter when most of the usage is indoor. And so we have to get lots of reductions during the next several months in order to meet the whole period-long goal that ends at the end of February 2016. So this is good, but it doesn't necessarily say we're going to get the entire period's goal. This is a picture updated through the end of May. We don't have the numbers through the end of June of where San Francisco's total system storage is. So they've dropped a little bit below 800,000 acre feet. And if you recall, the total usage for this system is about 220,000 acre feet. So they have a fair amount of years in storage, but it is falling fast. This is the picture just for Palo Alto, updated to last week, and we have the same kinds of pictures that was on the whole region-wide San Francisco one, and you'll see that we are doing well compared to 2013 is the top line, the blue line. The dotted line, which is the small dotted line, I guess, is the 24% reduction, which really should only start in June 1st. We didn't have a goal to get that starting in January. That goal is only from June 1st, but you can see where we are. And so we're also doing well as a city below the 24%. Again, this is what we hope for, that we need to do during the summer months, but doing fairly well. And just to remind you, the enforcement process we're going through, we've got, I don't know if this presentation has the numbers we've gotten of how many first and second and third violations. There have been several second violation notices that have gone out, and we've also sent one certified letter for a third violation to a customer who quickly changed things and stopped what they were doing, which was good. Oh, so here's the numbers. So, I guess 314 total notices. It looks like more and more, a larger percentage of them are coming in through this 311 app. 8 second notices, and then the one infraction that I talked about that required the registered letter to be sent, but no fines have been issued to anyone so far. And then to turn to the electric system, this is to show you for FY 2015, this drought is costing us an additional $13.5 million total of the supplemental, the replacement energy supplies, the need to buy RECs for that to be remain carbon neutral. It all adds up to quite a bit.
How many cents per kilowatt hour does that correspond to?
95.18 for the hydro supplies is how much hydro is costing now, which is well above market. Is that what you're asking?
No, I don't.
Oh, you're saying per kilowatt hour for a rate impact kind of thing?
My question was the additional cost of the drought in cents per kilowatt hour.
Well, $13 million is about 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour for us.
Right.
Overall.
That was what I was wondering. Thank you.
Okay.
Why does the hydro cost go up? Not the other costs, but just the hydro.
Yeah, I know. This has come up before, and it's because in a dry year, the costs of the Western project are split between water users and electric users, and water users pay less in a drought, and so we get to pay what they don't pay. That's why. Okay, and so you've seen this before, but this is a new chart that we added for fiscal year 2016, since we're almost done with 2015, or we actually are done with fiscal year 2015. So this shows you that we expect that the continued drought is going to cost $10.5 million more than if we did not have a drought. In FY 2016, and it could get worse. So I think this is the end of my presentation, if you had any questions.
Questions, comments? We're good. Thanks very much, Jane. Anyone have commissioner comments? Any comments? This is your opportunity on almost anything. Okay, next scheduled meeting is August 5th. It's been a pleasure. This meeting is adjourned.